Ba-da-bum-bum-bum-bum-bum. And live. All right. Hello. Welcome to For the Love of Sports. Today I have my good friend, compadre Jared Abbott here with me to talk about the AFC East. It's going to be a weird one, this one. So I'm excited to have you. Jared lives up, I don't know, where are you living now? New Hampshire, I think, right?
Up in New Hampshire, yep. We're in the
Yep.
middle of Patriots country up here now.
Live free or die, baby. Let's go.
Hey, what a motto.
It's the best. It's hands down the best. Like, I can't think of any other license plate that's just like, yeah, I know exactly where that is. Let's go. So yeah, excited to chat about this with you. You live up there. Obviously, you're from New Jersey where we are, so it's not too far from the Jets as well. But you're up there in Bills and Patriots country. So excited to talk about this. I mean, we've been doing these. I think this is 5 days in a row now. We've done one. So really excited. Going to do another one tomorrow, probably another one Sunday, and then Monday round out all the divisions. So it's been a blast. And I mean, just jumping right into it, the AFC East has pretty much just been the Patriots for the last 20 years, I think, give or take. But now Tom Brady's gone.
Yeah.
And now Bill Belichick's doing some weird stuff, especially with the draft. So I'm excited to talk about that. Excited to see if the Bills will ever be good. I don't know. They made the playoffs last year, but it was weird. The Dolphins, they now at least have Tua, so that's kind of cool. And the Jets are going to Jets, and that's why we're keeping them last. But yeah, man, thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it. How's your night so far?
Yeah, it's going well. I appreciate you having me on. It's fun to talk football, in a time where it's hard to come by sports information. I think it was a great time for us to have the draft. I think it was good for all of us. And, it really allows us to look back on a lot of the offseason moves. And a lot of things have happened in a sports world that, it's fun to talk about because hopefully we'll be able to actually see some live action, but a lot going on kind of behind the scenes.
I'm crossing my fingers, man. The draft was great. We watched it together. I think I was with you guys Friday night, which was a blast, and just getting to talk about second and third round. It's always one of my favorite times of year, but this year is especially with, I mean, normally it's going up against hockey playoffs and NBA playoffs. And this year, obviously, there's none of that. So it's kind of a drag, but at least we had that. So 3 straight days. I don't know, man. Honestly, I think I might have only missed about an hour of the draft total. I watched every other second except 1 hour where I had to go to the grocery store. So I mean, I don't know how much. I assumed you watched the entire thing as well.
Yeah, I think it was, the same situation for me. The only break I had was I had to run to Petco to pick up some dog food. That was probably beginning of the 5th round. Came back and picked up the rest of it, and I kind of caught up on what I missed, and it was I finished the 4th, and then decided, what, all right, let's make a quick break and then come back and see what's going on here. And that way I'm here for the end of the draft. So it was exciting. I mean, I couldn't get away from it. It's hey,
it doesn't get any better, man.
It's a draft.
Exactly. When there's nothing else on, we have to get into it. And your dog is pretty fantastic, so she deserved that food, especially at a time like the draft. I mean, of all the times you could have possibly went to the store, I think it's funny you picked the only time something live's on. But hey, your dog needs her food. You're gonna get her food, and I respect the hell out of that about you, Jared. So let's jump into it. I mean, obviously, the team we're gonna start with is the Patriots. They did a lot this offseason in terms of gaining, retaining, and losing players. And so, in terms of players gained, they signed Adrian Phillips. I thought that was pretty cool. Cody Davis, Brian Hoyer, a couple 1-year deals. That's something. Other than that, I mean, I don't know. Of the players they gained, outside of Adrian Phillips, who I don't even know how old that dude is anymore. I think he's been in the league the entire time I've been watching. Who are you looking at in terms of the players that they brought in through free agency?
I think what's interesting is they add a guy like a Bo Allen, who's kind of bounced around the league. He's kind of one of those classic Patriot type of guys that'll come there. He's going to be in the rotation. I think you might hear his name a couple of times coming up during certain spots in games during the season. Be a rotational guy, though. He's not a standout player, but that's what the Patriots are. I think, honestly, I look at where they're at from, and of course, I know we're going to break into Tom Brady, but I think when you look at players gained, the biggest thing to look at is Brian Hoyer, 1-year deal, and then also maybe who they haven't gained yet, but there's still time, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's the biggest question, because you look at some of the additions. Dan Vitale, I think, is an interesting addition at fullback, and that's, I think, might be the only team in the league we're going to talk about a fullback addition in the offseason.
Love it.
But quite frankly, you have a guy like, you see what happened with Devlin, who guy from, Brown is, not even in the league, is playing in, a semi-pro situation to start his career, works his way to the Patriots, becomes, I think, a 3-time Super Bowl champion with them. And he played a vital role. And that's just the thing about that team. It doesn't matter about who you are, where you came from, what you've accomplished. The Patriot way is a real thing. I mean, I know that it's kind of symbolic in terms of how successful they've been the last 20 years, but honestly, you don't need big names to go in. You just need guys to buy into the system. And that's why I mentioned guys like a Bo Allen or Dan Vitale, because you look at those guys, they buy into the system and somehow they find a way to produce better there than they had in other locations.
You see it all the time, and it's always you notice it less when they actually sign guys, and I think you notice it more when you see the people that leave, and we'll get into it in a little bit. Like a guy like Kyle Van Noy. He's good. He was on the Patriots. He does really well. I think he leaves the Patriots, signs this pretty big deal with the Lions, is terrible, goes back to the Patriots, is great, and then leaves and signs a mega deal essentially with the Dolphins now. So I don't know, it's just one of those things where Bill Belichick is smarter than all of us, whether we like it or not, and whether we hate him or not, he's just smarter. And hopefully being up there, you haven't become a fan at all. I want to make sure of that, but it's just always interesting to me to see who they bring in, because most of these 1 and 2 year deals, but I am confident a couple of these guys are then going to sign some pretty big money deals after it's all over. And then Bill Belichick's going to say, all right, I'll just find more guys off the street. I also love how he always, I don't think anybody in this list, but I'll be totally honest, I'm not 100% sure. It always feels like the Browns that have terrible, terrible first and second round picks, he'll pick them up for a 1 or 2 year deal at like zero money. They'll do exactly what he needs them to do. They'll either get paid and suck somewhere else. It's frustrating, but I respect the hell out of it.
You're very, very right in that regard too, of like where guys are picked, what they get paid from other teams. They come to New England on a discounted rate. They get a lot of value out of that, and then they move on because they produce. They sign somewhere else, and another team has a handful to deal with, and it's just this like vicious cycle that teams have had to deal with for the last 20 years. I mean, the AFC East, we know, has been probably one of the worst divisions in football,
hands down,
aside from the Patriots, of course, but it gives them 6 wins a year normally, right? I mean,
5. Miami always figures out a way to win 1, but other than that,
right.
yeah, 5.
True. And it's always in Miami, random humid days, something weird's going on, trick plays, Kenyon Drake, whatever,
Gotta love it.
And it always won. But aside, the Patriots literally won the last decade. I mean, they swept the decade, which is astonishing. And then you look at what they do, and no offseason is ever, newsworthy in New England. And it's just these guys that, I think that rather than the guys gained, I think you look at like the guys that kept, like, Devin McCourty, I mean, is honestly one of the linchpins of that defense. I mean, he's a phenomenal player. And then Matt Slater, probably the best special teamer in the game. And it's like an underrated re-signing pick, but when you retain a guy like that, but quite frankly, you keep a guy like that. I mean, he's a leader in the locker room. He's a captain on special teams. And that's just what this team builds themselves upon. And that's why guys that aren't maybe big names elsewhere, or maybe guys that are kind of bust elsewhere, come to New England and they produce. And it's because of that leadership.
It's frustrating as hell to watch. But again, I mean, looking back on it, we're going to say, how did this happen? Like, how does one team win for 20 straight years? Like, that's insane. They've had 2 separate dynasties within this entire run, which, if you think about that in itself, is just insane. Thankfully, I mean, the one time the Eagles do push through, it's against the Patriots, thank God. 2 times the Giants were able to do it. So us sitting here, we can say we had a hand in beating Tom Brady 3 times. At least that's the way I like to think about it. And, you bring up the players retained. I think one interesting one, Joe Thuney, or Tooney, however the heck you say his name, he's on the franchise tag, and his name came up a lot in potential trade discussion leading up to the draft. Clearly nothing ever came of it, so I don't know if he plays out the franchise tag, if Bill Belichick figures out a way to sign him. Do you have any insight up there in Patriot country for us?
I think just the talk right now is planning on having him as a piece of the team. I think that if there was going to be something that would have been done, it would have already been done. I think that's one of the things you also notice about the Patriots, is that they don't wait until the last minute. When they talk about deadlines, they're not a deadline type of team. If they have an objective, they're going to accomplish it. Now, with a franchise tag, there's always, just stickier points to it. I don't see him going anywhere. So at this point, I think that probably signs the tag, plays it out, see what happens after that. I think that it's interesting because with the tag, he's a huge piece in that offense. Even though he's a guard, he's a huge piece of that offense. And this is a team that is in transition, but yet is always competing, which is it's a reload, not a rebuild.
Yeah.
So you don't know what to expect. He may even sign an extension and a deal after. There hasn't been any talk about that up here in terms of news with him, but there's also no talk about him leaving. So I assume that as of right now, plays it out with the tag. They either work something out or he moves on at the end of the year. I mean, this is a team that's not afraid to move on from guys like that too, that are great players that will sign big contracts elsewhere. But that's just a situation with them. And I think it's interesting just the direction they're going in. Somehow they find a way to win games. So that's why guys like him will play it out, because that's a good spot to be in.
He will figure it out. I mean, I feel bad for him because he would have got a payday, right? He's just one of those guys that would have left, gotten a pretty big payday, and unfortunately, he's making what, $14 million this year, I think. So I guess there's worse situations to be in. But hey, I'm sure he would have rathered, that $60 million contract that Nate Solder signed to be terrible for the Giants. In terms of players leaving, I mean, there was an exodus to say the least. I mean, Tom Brady's at the top of the list. We'll obviously talk about that, but Kyle Van Noy, Jamie Collins, I guess Philip Dorsett matters. Stephen Gostkowski left. Duron Harmon, Danny Shelton. Again, that's a Browns guy, if I'm not mistaken. That was terrible. And it's just, they always have these, maybe not this big of an exodus, obviously, this year with two really, really key, and Gostkowski, if you want to consider him, three really, really key players that have been with the team for a very long time. But I mean, I guess we should probably start with the most important piece in Eldon Roberts, right? Like, that guy leaving is just going to Tom Brady obviously going is just insane. I mean, what was that like, especially being up there? And I mean, I didn't believe it until it actually happened. I thought there was literally 0.0% chance it was going to happen. What was it like actually being there? And what did they feel and Patriots fans feel like, especially up there?
There was an initial sense of shock. No one believed it. The first reports came out. I know when I first saw them, I said, need to fact check that.
Yeah, exactly. Let's double check.
I don't know. Let's be serious here. Really? But it was true. And it's interesting because the reaction of the base up here was very positive. They knew that this had been kind of an ongoing thing last couple of years. And that, at some point he'd move on, and I think there is, there's that thought in the back of your mind, like, we wish he would retire as a Patriot, right? And the fact that he didn't, that definitely hurts some people, but at the end of the day, the general consensus was they know what he did for them for the last 20 years, and if they're going to move on as a team, and he is going to transition elsewhere and play elsewhere, then, that's okay. And that was kind of the consensus, was it wasn't a breakup. It was just, moving on. And I think that was an interesting way that occurred, because I know one of the names we didn't initially have on the lost list, because it wasn't a player that played with them this year, but Rob Gronkowski, that I'm sure we'll talk about, joining him, there was a different reaction there than there was with Brady. And I think it's very interesting. Obviously, in sports, you just don't really see this happen.
No.
When,
oh my God, no.
Like, a guy that is, arguably the best of all time at the position, there's always those arguments. A guy that has dominated 2 decades of football, and then leaves the team he's only ever known for another organization. And it's just, you think back to some of the biggest names in the game of where they ended up, like where guys ended their career, Montana, Favre. You think about guys like that, and it's like, you always think about the glory days, but then it's like, oh gosh, he ended up like finishing up here. There's really nothing going on here.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that no one thinks it's going to happen with Brady. They still think he's somehow going to compete, even at his age and with that team. They still they say, well, the Bucs now host a Super Bowl. Will he, take them to the Super Bowl in their home stadium? And it's a very interesting dynamic when you think about a guy that, in all intents and purposes could have retired as a Patriot this year and no one would have thought any less of him, but he just wants to keep going.
I think the really interesting part of it is, yeah, I mean, obviously no one thought this was going to happen, but as you said, it's been 20 years of just pure dominance for this team. And so from that perspective, anyone under the age of 19 literally knows nothing else other than Tom Brady. So he's your favorite player, most likely. He's the one that you always look to. Yeah, you love Bill Belichick and what he does if you're from there, but what is that like? What is that like? How many people are finding out that they're actually Tom Brady fans, not Patriots fans? And how many people are actually angry about the fact that he left and saying, how could he do that to, us and this team? Like, where is that dichotomy and where are people like kind of on that spectrum? I'm curious.
I think that's a good point. If you were to look at the fan base, the fan base that knew the Patriots before Tom Brady, just appreciate everything he did for that
Mhm.
organization and
Yep.
what they want. And
They were so bad. Everyone forgets like the
terrible.
last 20 years, they've been incredible, but they were the laughing stock of
Mhm.
football for like 20 years before that.
Yeah, absolutely. If you go to Patriot Place, they have like their kind of Patriot Hall of Fame
Mhm.
area. Going through the seasons, all the championships, they have a video that they run through. And the most interesting parts, before they got to the success, they were atrocious. They actually almost moved out of the entire region and
Mhm.
moved as a team. And they were sold at that point, kept there, and then the team somehow found a way to have a home. And it took until this for them to really cement themselves.
Mhm.
I mean, obviously, you look at in the East in the past, when with the Bills, with Jim Kelly, and how the Bills were very dominant for a period of time. But when New England had Brady and they took over, young fans that started even 19, 20 years old, even people into their mid
Mhm.
20s that were like very young children when Brady took over, they don't know anything other than Patriots winning and Tom Brady.
Mhm.
And those are the ones that had the reaction of he's betraying the
Mhm.
team, the city, the fan base, that kind of thing. And I mean, it's certainly not the case, but it's a dose of reality
Yeah.
to young Patriots fans that are going to start understanding what every other team in the league has gone through over the last 20 years.
Crossing my fingers, man. Yeah, because they're the only team that's never been bad. The one year they were bad, they still had 10 wins and they just missed the playoffs because I think the two wildcard team had 11 or something, or one of the wildcard teams had 10 and they just lost the tiebreaker in some capacity. So it's crazy. I'm really excited to see what happens. I don't know. I think I'm rooting more for Tom Brady than for Bill Belichick just to see kind of what that looks like because Bill Belichick can coach for the next 50 years. It looks like he's a robot. Tom Brady will eventually stop playing at some point, but I don't know. We'll see how it goes. They also did lose, as I said, some other players. Kyle Van Noy, huge part, linebacker
Yeah.
in the defense. Jamie Collins, another linebacker. Gostowski, again, released, retired, whatever you want to say there. I think he'll probably end up retiring. How do you like moving, considering everything they've lost, retained, and people they brought in, what were some of their biggest needs going into the draft?
Well, you lose two big time linebackers, right? Jamie Collins, Kyle Van Noy. Van Noy stays in the division. Ironically, you look at some of the biggest losses between Van Noy, Collins, Harmon, and Shelton. And Shelton, as you mentioned, former first round pick of the Browns, it was terrible there.
Terrible.
Somehow New England resurrects career. And now all four of them, three of them going to Detroit, are all joining former defensive coaches of the New England
Mm-hmm.
Patriots. Shocker, right? From the
Look at that.
Belichick tree. But I think when you look at where they went in the draft, you lose Harmon, you lose Van Noy, you lose Collins. Okay, so what do you do with your first three picks? You go defensive back, linebacker, linebacker. Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Methodical approach. Interesting how in the third round they went with two tight ends. Then they signed an undrafted free agent tight end out of Boston College, gave him a guaranteed $80,000, which normally means he's going to have a pretty good shot of making the
Yeah.
team. I mean, you don't guarantee money to an undrafted free agent, but you have a New England kid, went to Boston College. So that's three tight ends. I mean, this is the Patriots. They
Mm-hmm.
love to stockpile tight ends, right? But where you go in the draft, I mean, classic Patriots move going to, the safety from
Mm-hmm.
Leonard Ryan, Kyle Doug, like, of course, right? Let's go completely. And I know this kid had a lot of attention leading up to
Mm-hmm.
the draft. So certainly nothing, taken away from him and the program it came from. But would you expect the Patriots to do anything less than to
Oh
take
no.
this absolute true wild card because you've never seen him against top competition? Yes, there's a lot of talk about him, but you don't know what you're going to get until he comes in. And at pick 37, that's borderline first round territory.
Yeah.
So, to come into that role, I mean, you're going to expect this person to contribute. And then you go, Power 5 conference linebackers, the next 2 picks, right?
Yeah.
You got the kid out of Michigan, kid out of Alabama. I mean,
yeah. And exactly. And that is it. When it happened, I was like, well, duh. Like, of course, Bill Belichick's the guy who picks this no-name, essentially, kid, Kyle Duggard from Lenore. I don't know. Where is that Division 2? Is it Division 1A? I actually don't even know anything about the school or anything about him. What can you tell me? Do you know anything about this guy?
This Division 2. I'm trying to think if they're in the Carolinas or where they. I know they're on the East Coast. I'm blanking even where they're at. Just because other than this kid, and it's funny because the school started actually getting scouts to come watch him, and this was the first time they've had scouts actually go to any of their games. Let's be serious here. Division 2 program.
Exactly.
But it was just a very bizarre situation. Extremely late bloomer, and grew into a frame that could compete at the top level, and clearly was the best player every time he was out on the field. And it just was extremely obvious, to the point that the film of these games started to get onto the internet, social media, and started to get around, be like, who is this guy? Like, why is he playing here? Why didn't he get recruited to go play somewhere else? Well, the thing is, because when the recruiting process was going on, this guy was small. He was not listed as athletic at all, and all of a sudden just exploded. Very late bloomer, very interesting story. I hope that he actually is able to continue excelling at the highest level, because I think it's a great story.
Yeah.
But it's just an unbelievable wild card from someone who had no sniffs at all at the Division 1 or the FBS or the FCS level. I mean, you're talking about going to Division 2. You're not ever thinking about playing pro football. You think about going there, getting your degree, and playing out your time, and then moving on. And
it's just crazy. I mean, when you think about it, Division 2 is really like the third or the fourth, because you have the Power 5, you have the Group of 5, then you have the FCS Division 1A and 1AA, and then there's Division 2. So there's he couldn't even make it into like the not North Dakota's a bad example because they're fantastic, but there's so many. Like Carson Wentz at least came from a school that was considered Division 1, right? Dallas Goedert, Division 1, just to name a couple Eagles for you. But it's just crazy. He didn't even make it to the lowest level of Division 1. He was in Division 2. And considering, as you said, then the next 2 picks are just Power 5. I mean, Michigan and Alabama. Does it get any more like blue blood than that? It's like, get it? Bill Belichick's smarter than me. I will never, ever deny that. It's just crazy to me that, as you said, he's taking a complete wild card. And I think if I'm not mistaken, there were some really funny pictures going around while everybody was at the combine. Bill Belichick was the only person actually working out this kid during the combine. So everyone else is at the combine. He's the only one not there. And he's working this kid out in just like a rainy, like football field somewhere. And it's just like pure, unadulterated Bill Belichick. And you're right. It's crazy. I mean, does he have comps? Like, can you compare him to anybody if he comes from Division 2? Like, who's come from Division 2?
That's the thing. I mean, you try and think back to players, but you're going to a different era of football, of guys that came out of these small programs. Because on the offensive side, I think of like, a Randy Moss or a Jerry Rice, or guys that came out of small programs. It's tough to compare a kid without seeing him against players of higher talent level and magnitude. Like you can look at size and you can see what he's done on the field, and you can start to look at players that had similar attributes or perform similarly. However, coming out of that, it's very hard to put a comp on. I mean, it's kind of like, I think back to, and I know it's you're looking at the other side of the ball, but you look at like a former Eagle and Brian Westbrook, but he went to Villanova. And a school that, again, no one came out of Villanova and went pro. Yeah. Here's this guy that had no business, really playing to his level as a pro. But now you compare people to him, but going into the league, it's like you didn't compare Brian Westbrook to anyone. No one knew who this guy was, and I think that even as a safety, I feel like you still don't really know who this guy is.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because if you see him playing, and in the first couple of years, assuming things go well for him in New England, I think they will, because he's joining an organization that has a phenomenal coaching staff. I have to think that you give it a little bit of time in the pro level, and there will start to be comparisons made.
Hmm.
I think it's early to make a comparison because, quite frankly, I just don't think that we know enough about him. Like we see a lot of the excitement, but what is he going to do on the field? What's his true role going to be? And how are the Patriots going to utilize him?
Hmm.
It's going to be a very interesting situation. They've had some very interesting situations from a defensive back perspective in general. Guys leaving, obviously Harmon, but even in years past, yeah, there was a situation with Patrick Chung. And so
Yeah.
you look about kind of what that secondary will look like. Obviously, it's going to be anchored by Devin McCourty, right?
Hmm.
He's one of your leaders. You bring him back, but what role does this guy fill, and in what capacity can he perform? And then once he settles in, then it'll be interesting to compare him to
Hmm.
guys that are at that level. Because I guarantee you'll be comparing him to guys that probably played at Power 5 conferences, or
Hmm.
it's tough to compare anyone to someone that played D2
Yeah.
or the old D1 AA, now FCS. I mean, even thinking back to that, it's like, who are you
Yeah.
going to compare him to? And I think that it's very difficult to do so.
It's very difficult, and I also think I agree with you. Like, I kind of want this guy to be great. I hate that he's on the Patriots, but of course, it's an awesome story. Of course, you want him to be good. The one thing I will say, especially this year, and we'll continue to talk about it, throughout this conversation, rookies aren't going to have as much of an impact.
Right.
Justin and I have talked about this. Derek,
Yeah.
Nick, Justin, we've all spoken about this, and they're not going to have as much of an impact because I think today is when rookie virtual mini training camp or some BS is starting. And what are you doing? Okay, you get the playbook. That's cool. Like, you can talk to each other. You can't actually do anything. And I think that, depending on how long this lasts and where, and I know the NFL was very adamant, if I'm not mistaken, at least the last time I read, that if all the teams can't go to a practice facility, none of the teams can go to a practice facility. So even in places like, I don't know, Green Bay, where it's less populated compared to especially New York City, Philadelphia, Boston, these areas, they're going to be affected because it's so bad still here on the East Coast in these major metropolis areas. And it's just unfortunate that a lot of these rookies that we talk about are probably going to have very, very little impact, especially on the offensive side when we get to the fantasy aspects of some of these things. But it's weird, man. I don't know. And I mean, I love it. Again, I want him to be good. Of course, it's Bill Belichick that picks him with the 37th overall pick, but it is crazy to me. So then the next pick in round 260 overall, they got Josh Uche, linebacker out of Michigan, and in the third round, 87 overall, Anthony Jennings, linebacker out of Alabama. Both, again, Michigan and Alabama coming off the board after Lenore Rye. Just hilarious. But how do you feel about these two linebackers essentially kind of filling the gaps and filling the spaces where some of these other linebackers may have left a hole?
Yeah, and I like both of these picks for this team. And one of the things, to your point about how, and I know it's been discussed, rookies having less of an impact this year because there's less ramp up time for them.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be accelerated and condensed, and they're not going to have the same feel for the environment, for the team, all the aspects when you're in a normal environment that you can go in. To that, I think the players that are best suited to make an impact as a rookie are players that come from programs that coach a pro style, that are proven to turn players quickly into good pros in their first year or two, and that have been just well coached over that time. And I think that's where you look at some of these major programs from coaches that have also played or that have played or coached in the NFL.
Yeah.
And they're able to prepare these guys. And I don't think there's any better, in such a unique situation that we're in. You look at these players that come from programs. I mean, you got Michigan and Alabama. There's a lot of pro influence in those coaching staffs, in those meeting rooms. That means that they're going to help get these guys ready as well. They're certainly not going to just move on without them. They're going to help these guys adjust. And I like both of these picks. I think you're getting something a little bit different in each individual, but you look at a Kyle Van Noy versus Jamie Collins. I mean, two very different styles of linebacker, but they both were effective in their time in New England. I think that's the key, is that for Belichick and his staff to find, and they always do, they pull out the strengths of each of these individuals, and they somehow, will morph their own linebacking positions to make this work for whomever they have. It's, you have like, the way that Kyle Van Noy played the game, I'm interested to see what he'll do down in Miami, because like you said, he kind of bombed in Detroit. I mean, it's just like, it's a unique style of play because I wouldn't say he excels or is elite in any particular area. Jamie Collins, I think a bigger name coming out, a guy that you kind of expect certain things from. But, same situation with these two young individuals going in. I think that you're going to get a little bit of something different from them. But when it comes to New England, that's okay. They're not a team that says, I have to have this style of linebacker, whether it's the small undersized speed guy, whether it's the big inside run stuffing guy. The NFL is a hybrid now, and New England's one of the best at picking guys that can come off the field and stay on the field in 3-down situations.
100%. It's so frustrating. It's a tale as old as time. But yeah, if I had to place a bet, I would think, I love the point that you make. It's funny the point you make, of course, because that first pick is from a Division II school with probably not that great of coaching, and nothing against that guy, but obviously you're comparing him to Nick Saban, and how you feel about John Harbaugh. Like, of course, he's not going to have that level of expertise, especially with these guys both coaching in the NFL, playing a lot of football in their careers as well. So it's very interesting to me there. But then, as you said, then they go to two of the bluest of the blue bloods coming out of programs that they're probably going to be more turnkey than anything. And now Bill Belichick can utilize them. And as you said, two completely different linebackers in what they lost, but really two different kinds of linebackers and what they bring in. And of course, Bill Belichick's going to figure out a way to put them in the best possible situations. And I'm confident the defense is going to be great, even with all the losses that they did incur. So then in the third round, in essentially back-to-back picks, within 4 picks of each other. Oh, no, I apologize. And within 10 picks of each other, they take Devin Asani. Did I say that right? Whatever. Tight end out of LTU. Yeah, that's cool. Tight end out of UCLA. And Dalton Keene, tight end out of Virginia Tech. As you said before, they love to stockpile tight ends. They brought in another one as an undrafted free agent. What about these two guys? And I guess, what do you see in them, and how to make the easiest comparison? Like, which one's Gronk and which one's Aaron Hernandez? Like, how are they just going to try and replicate what they used to have and just give Jarrett Stidham now just these two incredible tight ends that go along with the rest of the offense?
It's interesting that you say that, because now all the comparisons will be who's Gronk and who's Aaron Hernandez, right? Mm-hmm. But yet, when you look at these guys, I mean, I don't think either is Gronk. I don't think either is Aaron Hernandez. And it's
nobody's either. That's the thing. Like, they're terrible comparisons. Nobody's Gronk. He's the best of all time at tight end. It's ridiculous.
So, what you look at in these guys is, what you're going to get in the New England offense is going to be a very muddled view from a receiver perspective, tight end and receiver. I mean, you look at, quite frankly, I think when you look at these two, you need to look more at what they're going to bring to the team on the field, whether it's in their blocking abilities or their ability just to run routes. Because aside from Julian Edelman, let's be serious here, when you look at that receiving core, it's extremely depleted. You lost Philip Dorsett. I know that, they're really banking high on their first round pick from last year, that kid at Arizona State, and they think that, that there's going to be a lot of potential there. But this is a team that has always, and they were the first ones really that brought the two tight ends set onto the field, set them out wide, put them in the slot, whatever they felt like doing, because what they're trying to do is just create mismatches. And you just look at the size differential, right? That's the biggest thing. That's what Gronk brought to the table. Aaron Hernandez is a guy that was more of your speed tight end, kind of like what when Mark Andrews came into the league with Baltimore, a tight end that could really stretch the field, and that was just not what tight ends used to be. Now you see that all the time. Now you see, Kelsey, Ertz, I mean, the big names in the league. Okay, what can they do from, more than just blocking? Now these are guys that are very athletic. And that's what New England is looking at here in these two guys. You're going to, again, much like when you go linebacker, tight end. It's like, all right, you're not going to take the same player twice, but yet leave it to New England to duplicate their positions multiple times in the same draft. And then they, as I mentioned, they add the young kid out of Boston College as an undrafted free agent. There's no, guarantee he makes a team, but they gave him a guaranteed $8,000. I know they could easily write that off, but normally when you're looking at a kid from Boston College up in New England, you guarantee him money. He's a tight end. It's the New England Patriots. I think some way this kid finds a way to make the team.
Yeah.
And so now you add 3 tight ends in one offseason. And I think what's going to be important is to figure out, what role these guys are going to carve out for themselves. Because this is a team that is in transition across the board. They don't have Tom Brady, who is an elite, accurate quarterback that is always picking his spots from a route running perspective, you're going to get something a little bit different. You don't really know what to expect from the quarterback position. So I don't know what you're going to get out of these two initially. I think that's going to take some time for both these kids to develop and show themselves in what their true value is going to be to the team. But one thing is for sure is that knowing New England, they're both going to see the field, and I think they're both going to have the opportunity to show themselves in both sides of the ball here. And it depends on how they're going to excel from a blocking perspective and a reception perspective, as I mean. And I just don't know what you're going to get from them because you don't have reliable Tom Brady. If you had Tom Brady, like, all right, now make your comparison to how these guys are going to fill into those old tight end roles. I don't know what this team is planning on doing, and in the talk up here, no one knows, because when you aren't sure if you're going Jarrett Stidham, if you're going with Hoyer, if you're looking at one of the free agents still left out there, all of these guys utilize tight ends in a different fashion. Tom Brady was Mr. Consistent in how he utilized these guys, and he helped make their careers. Classic Patriots moves, but both could be impactful players, and also either or could very well work themselves out of the system. And that's just the way New England works. And I couldn't pick one over the other because quite frankly, I think right now it's a toss up. You look at these two.
It's something, man. I mean, it's so frustrating because we do all this and we do all this for fun. We talk about it. We try and think of this, think of that. But we have no idea. The comparison is always, someone's playing chess, someone's playing checkers. Bill Belichick's playing like that Chinese game that's like takes 18 years to finish. Like that's the game he's playing. We're still trying to figure out how to play checkers, and it's frustrating. But hey, that's why he's been to 9 Super Bowls in the last 16 years or something, 17 years. So it is what it is. And we will move on and hope for the worst for them. So just a couple late round picks here. They had a few late round picks, a 5th, 3, 6, and a 7th. So in the 5th round, 159 overall, they take the kicker. I'm not even going to try. His first name's Justin. What's up, Justin? But I don't know what his Rohrwasser. I don't know. He had some racist stuff on his arm. People were pretty angry about that. 182 overall, they pick a guard out of Michigan. 195, take an offensive tackle out of Wake Forest. 204, linebacker out of Wyoming. 230, a center out of Memphis. So clearly they were paying attention to offensive line in the later part of the draft. I mean, of these guys, I mean, who do you know of that could potentially start to make an impact sooner rather than later? Obviously the kicker, he's picked in the 5th round. You think he's going to make the team, but again, crazier things have happened. Does anyone out here really stand out in terms of either really fits the Patriot system, Patriot way, or even has a potential to make some impact early?
Yeah, I mean, I think one, it's interesting. They took the first special teams guy off the board, right? And I know they move on from Gostkowski, but you're talking about a 5th round pick at 159, taking this kicker out of Marshall that some people didn't even think was the best kicker in the draft. And again, classic Patriots move, right? They just think that they're smarter than everyone else and what they know. I like their next pick, another Michigan kid coming off the board. I think a versatile guard that you have. Also, we were talking about Tooney earlier in terms of the franchise tag. You're not quite sure what the future holds for the line, especially at that guard position. I think in the 6th round, you get a player of value, potential, well-coached kid. I think that he could step in, someone who can be, learning on the back end of things to potentially grow into a larger role in maybe 2 to 3 years. And and I think when you look at just the next pick, a few picks away from there, a tackle out of Wake Forest. In Wake Forest, again, a team that it's tough to get a good read on in terms of the ability of their players, because quite frankly you just don't see a lot of explosiveness coming out of their offense. However, Justin Herron is a kid that I think is going to step in to New England, and as a late round pick, I think is someone that could probably learn to play both, on the left and the right side, someone who can step into that organization as just, a depth player block that, given the opportunity, can step into a role. And it just comes down to, I think the biggest attribute when you look at any of these draft picks and these kids, and obviously they went O-line 3 out of the last 4, right? So, when you look at that, you look at coachability. And that's the biggest thing. I know that that's across the board, a very blanket statement, but in the Patriots organization, I think that has the biggest impact compared to any other team out there. That goes back to that Patriot way mentality. I think you look at it, a kid that can come in, is a student of the game. You look at the players that have really excelled within that franchise over the years, players that were not big names that went in there. That's because they were students of the game.
Mhm.
They spent their time in the film room. They had tremendous coaching staffs to assist them. And I think you look at these, when you go O-line heavy at the end, you're looking for guys that can just start to learn your system, learn how your team's going to operate. And, there's no mistake. You go tackle, guard, and center. You don't duplicate in the last 3 or the last 4 picks of those 3. I know they have the linebacker out of Wyoming as well. I think you look at, you have 2 linebackers already early, second, third round. So, if you look at an opportunity for a 6th rounder from Wyoming, you're probably looking more at special teams than anything at this point in the game. But very few teams value special teams as much as the Patriots. So, they could even look at that as, hey, we have something here as a strong special teamer. But I think that's the biggest thing. You look at the 3 of the last 4 picks as linemen. It's who can develop to be low in terms of the expectations and the compensation level. These are lower end picks. This is a franchise that is notorious for taking advantage of the opportunity to have someone at the lower end of the compensation spectrum because they can spend their money elsewhere. And you've seen that over and over again with them. And it's no surprise that they take 3 project linemen. Obviously, one of those 3 is Power 5. And that's why I mentioned him particularly, because I just think that from the potential of those 3, I think that a versatile guard, especially where that franchise is going, could provide some tremendous value.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I really like that. Again, the coachability aspect. Can you just listen? Because they know better. One thing I will say, I mean, Dante Scarnecchia, he's one of 2 offensive line coaches that I think anybody in the NFL can name, him and Tom Cable, and that's because Tom Cable choked a guy. But, other than that, like, he's gone. Dante Scarnecchia is no longer the coach there. I'm sure they've been grooming whomever for the last 15 years of his contract or whatever it's been. So I'm sure they're going to be fine, but you never know. Crazier things have happened. I don't think the Patriots are going to be the same when Josh McDaniels eventually, potentially, takes over. So we'll see what happens there. And it's interesting to say the least. The Patriots had a very interesting draft. I think they're going to be fine. Again, Bill Belichick knows so much more than I do. Sometimes I think, the one thing we can point out and say, he still didn't draft any wide receivers. And I think that's because he kind of sucks at drafting wide receivers. I mean, he doesn't really, other than Randy Moss, obviously, who he didn't draft. I mean, of the wide receivers, he's never really drafted that many good ones, especially over the last 20 years for Tom Brady. It's kind of crazy how, Julian Edelman, yes. Danny Amendola came from St. Louis, now LA. It's just been very weird in that regard. So I'm not too surprised, but man, they know tight ends, and I'm sure they're going to be just fine on that end. But moving on from Tom Brady, just a couple more minutes here on the Patriots. What do you think? What does this team look like next year, and how on edge are the Patriots up there, and are Patriots fans up there where you're living?
I think the biggest question is entering this season. This is probably the first year, quite frankly, in at least the last decade, if not longer, that the Patriots might not be the favorite to win this division. And that's just, you've Jarrett Stidham and Brian Hoyer as your quarterbacks. And this league, quite frankly, goes with the quarterback. They did a terrible job of utilizing Sony Michel last year. I don't know if he's going to have an expanded role in this offense because of Brady moving on. Not quite sure how they plan on utilizing him. I think he was, misused a bit last year when they could have taken advantage of his opportunities and his value. But with that aside, to your point, not a great team at drafting linebacker or drafting wide receivers, and quite frankly, not a team that really focuses there. I think, when you look at not this year's draft, but last year's draft, it was kind of an anomaly in where you look at. And obviously they think very highly of that young kid, and he did nothing in year one. It's jury will be out, because if he doesn't work out and pan out, this team is then going to look to more of those transitional players. But I think that Tom Brady made players great in the role they served. I mean, don't get me wrong, Edelman, Amendola, you see these guys like a Rex Burkhead, and like guys, James White, the way they utilize these types of guys that are small players, they all are shifty. They find a way. They're great route runners, whether they're running backs or receivers. It doesn't matter what position they are, because they just churn these guys out to produce. However, you look at now, Tom Brady's gone. It's how they move on from him. Is it Jarrett Stidham? Is that what they said when because one of the biggest surprises of the draft is they didn't draft a quarterback at all.
Yeah, not even at all. Usually you'd think they'd grab one. I mean, they have
The
3
late,
sixth-round picks. Like, is that linebacker out of Wyoming that better than at least just getting a look at some of these quarterbacks? Like, it's crazy to me.
the irony is that every team in the AFC East drafted at least one quarterback except for the Patriots, and they're
Mhm.
the only team that you expected to draft
Yep.
a quarterback.
Exactly. Yep.
And it's a very Bill Belichick type move where he puts his husky in the seat, walks away, doesn't really
I
care
love
during the
that.
draft. Like he
I
just
did
is
love that. I'm not gonna lie. I love that.
like he just kind of almost is like he's toying with just the
Mhm.
league and the way he plays this mental game. But he must have at this point, knowing just what he's done from a coaching perspective, in his mind, he's moving forward with Stidham or he has a plan in place. You have guys still available. I mean, Hoyer. I cannot imagine you go into week one with Brian Hoyer as your starter. I
No.
think that if you go into week one, it's Jarrett Stidham, or you look at one of the 3 top guys remaining in free agency. And I don't see it. I just saw a report today of, and I'm sure Justin could speak better to this one, but Andy Dalton, they're talking about him going to
Mhm.
Jacksonville potentially. And Cam Newton, I just can't see
Oh God, no.
that in New England. Jameis Winston just went to the Saints. Again, another player that they were talking about in New England, not a good fit. Joe Flacco, is he someone that maybe ends up there? I don't know. I think at that point, you see what you have in Stidham. But very
Yeah.
odd that they didn't take someone late, a project. I mean, this is an organization that loves project players. And the
Yeah.
fact they didn't take one quarterback late was definitely a surprise. So that's the biggest question is how they move on from Brady and what this offense looks like. Do they become a more balanced offense that actually runs the ball?
Mhm.
Um, or did they expect whoever steps in as a Jarrett Stidham or whomever to run this offense just like Brady and being very methodical and a game manager going up and down the field and just put puzzle pieces in? I think that this team, more than any, just has roles already laid out, and now they just go get the player that they're going to plug in. That you're going to do this, and it's worked.
And
So
it's gonna work, and it's gonna keep working, and we're all just gonna keep crying down here outside of Patriot Country. And I think we'll talk about it in a bit with the Bills, but I thought Jacob Eason was the absolute perfect, especially with him in the 5th round. I just thought it was an absolute steal. The Patriots would pick him up, see Jared Stidham stuck, put Jacob Eason in, and everyone would be like, wait, why did this guy drop to the 5th round again? Oh, he can't throw the ball a mile, but he can do everything else fine. That's interesting. But that would have been perfect Patriots for me personally. So that's enough about the Patriots. I don't want to talk about them anymore. They're too good. Let's move on to the rest of the AFC. And as you said, they've sucked. As you said, Patriots might not be favored to win the East. I actually think they might be, or at least they're tied with the Bills in at least win total. I don't know where the juice is right now, but I'm pretty sure they're both around 9.5 wins. The Bills, obviously, they traded their 1st-round pick for Stephon Diggs. I think a 1st and like a 4th or a 5th. I love this. They brought in Josh Norman on a 1-year deal to see if he can, I don't know, just be alive anymore. Brought in Mario Addison, AJ Klein, Vernon Butler. I thought that was a pretty interesting one. Quentin Jefferson. Of the players they gained outside of Diggs, because I think that's a pretty obvious one.
yeah.
How do you feel about the rest of the players that you think that they brought into their team in the offseason?
Yeah, I mean, I like the offseason that the Bills had. And why I say I think the Patriots might not be the favorites because you look at the season the Bills had last year and you see the way teams are trending. And yes, the Patriots are the Patriots until someone takes them out, right?
Mm-hmm.
However, with the Bills, their team is trending upwards and they have a young, very strong team that has an identity.
Mm-hmm.
Their defense, we've always known. Their defense, I mean, you go to Buffalo, good luck against that defense. I mean, even the Patriots, when their
Mm-hmm.
offense is demolishing everyone else, they go to Buffalo, you're playing that game, you're dealing with the Buffalo Mafia, the Bills Mafia. You just somehow you just can't get anything going.
Mm-hmm.
So you start on the defensive end, right? The Diggs move, I loved it. I think that gives them the explosiveness on the offensive side of the ball. And then we'll get into the draft picks later. I also like what they did at running back
Mm-hmm.
as well with Zach Moss. But
Yeah.
you look at the players they've added. Josh Norman, total toss-up, 1-year deal.
Love
Why
it.
not take a shot, right? He could go there and he could add some jump to that defensive back core. If nothing else, a little swagger.
Mm-hmm.
And quite frankly, he might not really pan out. Might be one of those veteran guys that goes there extremely average at best, but it doesn't matter. It's a 1 year deal. You didn't sign him to a
Exactly.
lucrative contract. You didn't put multiple years into it. So it doesn't matter. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. You know what? Very low risk move, high reward if he actually comes back into turn. I mean, Washington ruined that guy, unfortunately.
I was gonna say on Josh Norman for a second. The reason I love it is I don't know how hard. I mean, he was not good last year, and he was bad last year, and he wasn't very good the year before that. Remembering what he was when he was in his prime is one thing, but also understanding the Redskins were supposed to be bad, and they were very, very bad. So I'm not gonna call into question his level of effort. I don't think that's a good thing to do to another human being. But at the same time, how hard do you think he was actually trying? Do you really think he cared about any of those games at all? So I am curious. I'm just curious. As you said, it's a 1 year deal. I think it's only a couple $1,000,000. They figured out. I mean, their cap was just completely ridiculous 3 years ago. I think they had like 70 million or something ridiculous in dead cap money. But once all that got flushed out, then they found some dollars. And as you said, they've been able to build a team and actually compete. I mean, they made it to the playoffs for the second time, I think, in 3 years, which is incredible. I mean, they haven't been in the playoffs in a million years before that, and they should have won that game. That's a whole nother conversation, but I don't know. I'm excited. And what about the rest of the off-season signings?
Yeah, I really like adding. I think AJ Klein. I love AJ Klein. He's just a tackling machine. I mean, he's a guy that you can plug in on the outside. He can hop into the inside if need be, depending on your package. But he's just like Mr. Reliable. And for the Bills defense, it fits in, I think, perfectly. He's going to be a guy that's going to be a high tackle total guy, and just, is a guy that doesn't need anything either. He's just going to go in, do his job, get it done. Really fits in. I mean, Sean McDermott, obviously from his ties way back when with Philadelphia, and then I know he had a couple stops along the way, but he's always had that mentality. I mean, he's a great defensive mind in that regard. Mario Addison, I think, will be an interesting pick. I think it's a 3 year deal. I think you can get some tremendous value. He obviously offers some more rush on the edge compared to an AJ Klein, who's more of just your kind of steady tackling linebacker. But I like what they did. I mean, you look at what they've done with those two additions there. You add two more guys to your D line. I mean, this is a team that can't have enough guys in the front seven. You see three linebackers when you also add Matakevich also on a couple year deal. And then you have Quentin Jefferson, again, a guy that I think you could actually, pick some potential out of that can maybe resurrect some things with Buffalo. Sign a 2 year contract. So obviously they think highly enough to give him 2 years. And then Vernon Butler as well. Same thing on the D line. Again, a team that, does not shy away from filling up their front seven. That's where they've made their bread and butter. And that's why they cause so many problems for other teams when it comes to the defensive side of the football. I mean, especially when you look at the run, they've always been a great run defense, and they find a way to frustrate teams in the passing game too, without really bringing in top name cornerbacks. I mean, this is a team that when Ronald Darby was actually a big name in the game, they decided to trade him away for Jordan Matthews. Nothing comes of it, but they just move on, and they no worse for wear. It's just a team that I think you pick up guys in your front seven. And when teams can't run the football, you're forced to throw the ball. But then that's when the pass rush comes in. So I think Mario Addison might actually benefit quite a bit from joining this team, and especially in those passing downs.
Yeah, I'm excited. I always root for the Bills. I mean, they're always just it's so sad. So I'm always a fan of the Bills. I want to see the Browns be good. Like, there's just some of those teams where unless they're playing the Giants, it would be nice to see them win, right? Like, I just want them to win. And the Bills are always one of those teams. I think half of it is because I actually watched people when I was in Cleveland last year. When we were in Cleveland last year, we actually watched Bills Mafia throw each other through tables, which, seeing it in person, it's just this energy that comes off that table when you hear it snap and crack and the person kind of get up and they're excited, but you can tell it's like, dude, did you break a rib? Are you okay? But no, you're still drinking. You're good. Okay, we're good. So, I'm always a big fan of the Bills. They obviously brought back a bunch of their players as well. Starla Tulule, didn't realize he was even still in the league, honestly. But, I mean, defensive tackles that you don't know their name, that means they're probably pretty damn good at run stuffing if you don't hear him getting sacks. Jordan Poyer, I don't know why the Browns let him go, but he's been fantastic in the back end of that defense since he's been in Buffalo. He's been great. He's not a huge ball hawk, but he gets a bunch of tackles, and he does have interceptions. I always feel like it's 3-4 interceptions every year. It's like, that's pretty damn good. He's always doing something. Also, I will put my hand up and say that his wife is the best follow on Instagram. So if anyone out there does not do that already, I would highly suggest it. Re-signing a guard, always very important. Bringing back a tight end, always very important. I mean, I think what they did in re-signing everybody, just the people that are there. Again, none of these are long-term. There's 1 3-year deal. There's just a bunch of ones, or two 3 years. I apologize. Bunch of ones and a 2-year deal. So they're not mortgaging their future on any of these guys. But if they're in the system, they're worth it. They're well spent. I mean, it makes sense, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, run stuffing, D tackle. I mean, Star Lutulele, when he first came in the league out of Utah, I mean, he's a guy that was just mammoth of a human being that would just plug the hole. He was like your perfect 4-3 type D tackle. I mean, everyone loved this guy. Now he's maybe on the backside of his career, but still productive enough there in a 3-year deal. And again, you just look at adding to that front seven. Jordan Poyer, I'm with you. I think one of the more underrated safeties in the game. I think one of the better tackling safeties in the game too. I mean, this is a guy, like, talking from a fantasy perspective in an IDP league, this is a guy that has been a huge contributor the last 2 years just in tackles alone. He maybe isn't the biggest ball hawk when it comes to picks, anything along those lines, but this guy is steady. I think great fit again for that defense, because you don't need, you know, a ball hawking safety in that defense. You just need a sure tackler who actually isn't afraid to come down into the box as well. I mean, just fits the mold. Shocked that he got out of you know, probably for the best.
Yeah, no, I'm not surprised. Yeah, not really surprised. It's still Cleveland, so
you know, at the end of the day, you know, you look at the guys that walked away from there, but those are the two biggest that come to mind. I think you look at the fact they've actually retained a number of the guys too, speaks to what they're developing down there as well. The culture that they are putting in place, the system that they have as a team, they're buying in, and that's why you look at them retaining over half a dozen guys, and you only let 2 players go, and really one that I think is going to be more impactful than the other in terms of the loss, but then what they did in terms of who they brought in, and then what they did in the draft, and I'm talking about Shaq Lawson, of course, is what they've done. But then, I mean, you know, when you transition what they've done, players retained, losing very few, and then you go to the draft, and it's like Christmas Day for them when they're able just to say, oh, well, we lost Shaq Lawson. Well, you know what? We end up getting a guy who had maybe a mid-first round grade on some people's boards at 54. So
it made absolutely no sense. We were watching this day together. It made 0 sense that AJ Epinesa made it all the way to pick 54. I mean, I thought he was going to go in the first round. And then once he didn't go in the first round, I was like, awesome. The Giants will probably get him at 36 or whatever they were picking. They ended up, Xavier McKinney also dropped, and I'm kind of happier that they did take him, because he looks like he's going to be a lot of fun in that defense. But Epinesa just kept dropping and kept dropping. And the Bills, I mean, yeah, they didn't have a first round pick, but they absolutely got a player that just about everybody out there thought was a first round talent. I mean, especially coming into draft season, he was regarded as a top 10 talent by some people, like easily. I mean, there was Chase Young and then him. Now, obviously, edge rusher, you had Chason from LSU. You had Kinlaw. He's more inside. He's more of a D tackle coming in from South Carolina, if I'm not mistaken. But Epinesa was still up there with Yitzhak Gross-Matos as well. Penn State guy. You got your shirt on. I like that. And it's just crazy. I mean, I totally agree. It's just insane to me that he dropped that far. How does he pretty much just fill the hole that Shaq Lawson left?
Yeah, I mean, what a player to go to the Bills. I think that's just, you look at like perfect fit in the draft. Like, absolutely, like you have the kid who's a tough kid out of Iowa. He's known for being a you know, he's like just already a filled out strong DN. He's not one of those like speed edge rushers. He's very physical, good on the edge when it comes to the run. I think one of the things people also don't realize, in his last 2 years in college, he had 22 sacks. We talk about him not really being much of a sack producer in the pros, but you're talking about Big Ten offensive lines in the Big Ten. We know how good they are, and this guy finds a way. And I had the chance to see him play a few times just from following the Big Ten throughout the last couple of years, of course. And I just, you see this guy and you just know he's going to come in and he's steady. You know, there's extremely low risk, high reward player again here. And it's just like the fact that he falls to 54, I was shocked. I actually, when the Eagles were picking the pick above, when they ended up taking Jalen Hurts, I thought, well, the Eagles love to draft linemen, you know, defensive linemen as well. Why not just add this guy to the mix? I mean, you have to think about where players are at on your big board. You have to think he's at the top of a lot of teams' big boards. and the best player available. And at that point, it's like, take the best player available. He slips past them. I just surprised because, just from past drafts, New England or the Philadelphia loves to take a guy like that, where you think about a player who's going to be a DN guy that's Mr. Consistent. And also, quite frankly, I thought that even where New England, took Duggar, I thought that they were a great spot for Epineza. Just another option where, he just is a very athletic DN that's physical against the run, and I think underrated in his ability to rush the passer. And the Bills strike gold here with this pick. I can't see this guy not going there and fitting in better than most when it comes to, you talk about a rookie that can make an impact. And you mentioned that earlier about how fewer rookies this year will. This is a rookie I can see making an impact. I don't know what his numbers are going to look like at the end of the year, but I can see him immediately seeing the field with this team and just being a great puzzle piece.
As you said, just building those lines, just building that front seven, just making it frustrating. Being in the division with Tom Brady for so long, that was always something that they tried to do, and they just did that. They could just never get over the hump offensively. They never had a good quarterback, and Josh Allen's, I think he's okay. He's good enough to take him to the playoffs. At least we've seen that. So we'll see what happens there, and I'm excited. And I love the fact that you said, he fits in well culturally too. He's a big guy. He looks angry. He sounds angry, and I think he's going to fit in well, especially in those cold Buffalo home games. We'll see how that goes. So that was their second round pick, and then their third round pick. Even though they just grabbed Devin Singletary last year, if I'm not mistaken, or the year prior, they bring in another running back in Zach Moss, who ran a terrible 40 time, which is probably a very big reason he dropped this far. But how do you think he will fit in to that running back room, and more importantly, just into that offense?
Yeah, I love this pick as well. And like you said, he probably fell because of that, because this is a game where
it was a
teams
bad 40. I don't remember what it was. It was like in the 4.7s, if I'm not mistaken, right?
It was just, I think not indicative to the way that he's able to play the game on the field with pads on. And I think you can say about certain players, some of them just don't run great 40 times, but they're faster on the field with pads on, or they don't play the game where they have to be a blazer. And I think that's a Zach Moss style of guy. You look at, and this is a great transition from what Frank Gore brought to the table with this team. A physical guy. Frank Gore was, kind of an athletic, but meat and potatoes kind of running back too. This is a guy that'll go between the tackles. He gets the job done. He'll find a first down, and just, if you need 3 yards, he'll get you 3 yards. And that's just the way it is. And I think Zach Moss will fit in very well. He'll complement Singletary in this offense, gives them 2 running backs, plus Josh Allen's very mobile. You add Stephon Diggs. I think you have a very good thing going here with your offense. I think Zach Moss is just a great young transition to where Frank Gore is now moving on, of course, obviously twilighting his career here with that organization, but still productive nonetheless. And then you saw Singletary starting to take over as the year goes on. Singletary will take over that job, but Zach Moss, I would not be surprised if he sees a lot of time on the field as well. I don't know if there was a better running back coming out into the draft at breaking tackles than Zach Moss. You look at his ability to break tackles, you look at his yards after contact. This is a guy that if he didn't play in Utah on the West Coast, if he played in a bigger market or maybe on the East Coast, would probably get a lot more attention.
Yep, and that's that East Coast bias for you. We do only care about people on the East Coast because we're asleep by the time. I love college football, but I've probably, at the time most of those games start, I've literally watched 10.5 hours of football. I'm usually pretty, I'm not going to say I'm footballed out, but I'm probably asleep because I've been drinking all day. So it's hard for me to watch those Pac-12 after dark games. Third pick in the draft, and I love everything you said about him. I think I think that 40 time made him drop significantly, but if he can break tackles, if you can make that comparison at all to Frank Gore, who's clearly a Hall of Famer at this point, it's a great person to then pair with Singletary. If it could just be the same thing, just a little bit younger, get you those 3 yards, break some tackles, do what you need to do, and that offense probably, I don't think they'll lead the league because of what Lamar Jackson and the Ravens did last year, but they'll probably lead at least the AFC East. They'll probably be up there top 5 in rushing, which I think is always important, which is in a pass happy league. We've always found if you still can run the ball and you run it well, there's a good chance that you actually make the playoffs. So joke's on everybody else. So with their third pick in the 4th round, 128 overall, Gabriel Davis, wide receiver out of UCF. I feel like all of the Bills wide receivers, now they have Stephon Diggs, it's a little different, but they were all the same guy. It's like, all right, do you want to run a straight line or do you want to run a straight line? And I feel like that's all they had. Now they have Stephon Diggs. He can actually run routes. I'm curious to see how he fits in that offense. I'm curious to see if in the first 2 games, if he doesn't catch a total of 10 balls, if he just starts getting angry and throwing his helmet places. Like, I'm curious about that side. As a player, I think he's great. How does Gabriel Davis, what does he do, and how does he either complement or just duplicate what they already have in the offense?
Well, I think what they're adding is more young depth to the wide receiver position to go along with because obviously you have your starting 2, right? So like no one's expecting a guy to step into one of those top 2 roles. I mean, when you trade for Diggs, you already had a guy in Brown. I mean, I think you have a good setup there from just your simple, 2 wide receiver set. Look at 3. Okay, so what are we going to do? We're going to implement here. We're going to throw in, kind of a Cole Beasley-esque type of, guy in the slot. And hey, that works. A lot of these smaller kind of, scat receivers, I guess I'll say, kind of step into that role very well. I like Davis. I think he's a guy, let's remember how good the UCF program was for a period of time. They kind of, stopped getting the spotlight after, a couple-year run. But this is a guy who knows how to win, went to a very good program, and was very productive in college. And I think that it's a player that, you look at as maybe an underrated receiver in this draft. Maybe if you didn't have the type of wide receiver talent, this is a guy that goes a little bit higher in other drafts as well. I mean, I think you can make that case probably for a number of receivers in this draft that fell into the mid rounds, where in a different draft year without this type of talent, we're talking more about them. We're talking up their skills rather than talking down their skills, because we're comparing them to the guys that are the top end guys in this league. So, I think the jury's out in terms of obviously long-term prospect, but, you take a shot at 128 in the 4th round on a guy that I think could step in and become a number 3 receiver for that team and step into that role. I like the pick. I think it's a value pick at that point. Again, when you go wide receiver in this draft, in the 4th round, you're getting a good player. It's not like in years past where, you may as well just look at a different position because you're just kind of grasping at straws. I think you're getting guys that had productive college careers that also can translate to the pro game in this mid round. I think we're going to see that, look a couple of years down the road. It'll be interesting to see some of these 3rd, 4th round receivers that carve out their own career in the NFL that maybe just got overlooked because they didn't have the hype going into the draft. So
yeah,
I like to pick them.
Not even the hype. It's just, as you said it before, like they're being compared to Jerry Jeudy and CeeDee Lamb and Henry Ruggs, who coming out, 2 years ago, people were like, watch out, these guys are going to be top 10, top 15 picks. And 2 of them end up being top 15 picks. One of them ends up dropping a little bit, but it's just incredible. If you can find these wide receivers in the 4th round, you're paying them practically $0. And in a couple of years, you're going to have to give Josh Allen his extension because he's a quarterback. He's going to make $25-30 million, whatever it ends up being. So having these low cost guys, I think, is very important. I'll quickly go over some of these lower picks, and then obviously we're going to talk about Jake Fromm. He was picked in the 5th round, 167 overall, quarterback out of Georgia. If he came out after his freshman year, he probably would have been a first round pick, which is kind of ironic how that works. We then in the 6th round, they have a couple picks. Tyler Bass, kicker out of Georgia Southern. 207, another wide receiver, Isaiah Hodges out of Oregon State, and 239 overall, 7th round, Dane Jackson, cornerback out of Pittsburgh. I think obviously the one we need to talk about is Jake Fromm. And from a skill set standpoint, it makes 0 sense to me. So I'm going to need you to explain this, because he is the prototypical pocket quarterback, doesn't really have a big arm, doesn't really, he does all the things he needs to, nothing, doesn't super excel at a lot of things, I'd say. I mean, I think he's good, not great, to say the best. And then you have Josh Allen, who has the biggest arm that humanity has ever seen, probably. It's a rocket ship. The fact that he runs around, he does everything that's mobile. He runs, he jumps, he does whatever necessary. Why the heck would they go with a quarterback that's going to be a backup for them for 4 years? Hopefully that's the goal, right? You're picking somebody that will be a backup and not see the field. Why the heck would they go with someone that's almost the complete opposite? You build your whole team around one guy. You're then going to have to change it all if anything does happen to him. I just don't understand it.
I think it was just at a point in the draft where at 167, I know that people have questions about Jake Fromm's arm and his ability to move outside the pocket. There were some people that didn't really like him very much. I'm one that does like Jake Fromm, and I'm not saying that he's going to all of a sudden become an NFL starting quarterback, but I also am saying that you're talking about a guy that is extremely humble. He's a student of the game. He's been well tracked from some of the different documentaries that have showcased him and, his abilities and his personality as a human. I think when let's remember Josh Allen when he went to Buffalo and the draft day, someone who's extremely outspoken. He's, this wild gunslinger, I feel like he wanted to be Brett Favre when he started talking there and just kind of, shooting off. And hey, why not? If the kid has that bravado, then why not? Jake Fromm's a guy that's going to be much more on the humble side of things.
Yeah.
So I think you're getting a guy at 167 that probably could have gone earlier. I was actually surprised that New England didn't look at him at 159. I just thought that New England and Jake Fromm, to me, I know you talked about Jacob Eason. Again, another great pick for them. I thought between the two, they would have picked one of them. Between the 4th and 5th rounds, they just chose not to. So obviously they must not have felt like the value was there. But a guy like Jake Fromm, very different style from Josh Allen, but a winner from Georgia, a guy that is a very intelligent quarterback, understands the game. I think he'll be a very good backup, if nothing else, to just, Josh Allen's a young guy. We know his ability from an arm strength perspective. We know how much he can run with the ball too. He's extremely athletic. I think Jake Fromm is someone who can almost help work with him from more the mental side of the game too. Maybe help, in terms of decision making. I think Jake Fromm has a lot to bring to the table when it comes to his ability to read the field and understand the game. That's how he was such a good quarterback in Georgia. We know his arm strength isn't not great, and that's why he'll never be a true NFL starting quarterback that's going to make a difference. But there's something to be said for the way he was able to carve out a career and beat out some very good recruits at Georgia too to take over that job. I think that goes to speak to his ability to understand the game. I think that's going to help Josh Allen, his development.
That's exactly why Justin Fields is at Ohio State now, right? Because he couldn't. Jake Fromm beat him out. I thought it was very weird, that whole situation anyway. But Jake Fromm comes in as a true freshman, if I'm not mistaken, because Jacob Eason gets hurt. He ends up going to Washington, so Jake Fromm takes over. Obviously, they go to the championship game, national championship game. They lose in just the most incredible possible fashion that you could lose in, to another true freshman quarterback, and Tua, who we'll actually get to talk about in a little bit. But it's just, his career is crazy. I didn't, with how people thought he was going to fall in the draft, I didn't understand why he came out. Turns out, I'm assuming they have another quarterback that's coming in that's ready, and I don't think Kirby's going to say, yeah, we'll roll with you one more time. Nope, we're going to go with a better quarterback. So we'll see how it goes. But I don't know, man. I thought he'd go a little bit higher. So overall for the Bills, especially those first 4 picks, essentially, it seems like you liked. Including it all, how do you feel they did in terms of what they lost, especially not being too much, in terms of what they retained, and what the outlook is for the upcoming season?
Yeah, I like the outlook for them. Quick note on Tyler Bass, I just saw a video online. He, while standing still, kicked a 50-yard field goal. I don't know if anyone's seen that video. They should check it out. He literally standing still kicked a 50-yard field goal. It was unbelievable. And then you get a guy in Dane Jackson, extremely physical. Felt like he was always slighted at Pitt. They kind of that younger brother to Penn State. I got to see him in the Pitt-Penn State last time they played. That guy he's scrappy. I'll put it that way. And I think that's a great way to describe this team. I think that's the way that they will scrap their way to finally an AFC East divisional championship over New England, is to just claw their way there. I think that when you look at this team, they're close. I think that they're very close. I think they have a very strong defense, and I think that they're on their way. They have a young quarterback who is their guy. They added Stephon Diggs, huge move to the offense. Zach Moss will complement Singletary very well. And then on the defensive end, Empineza is just going to step in. I think that this team is on the upward trend, and it wouldn't shock me if we come down to the end of the season and they have a shot to take the crown from New England.
I would, I'd ride that bandwagon with them. Believe me, I won't jump through tables, but man, I'm going to be rooting for them. I think it's great. I think again, what they were able to do. I think the craziest part is, even though bringing in Stephon Diggs, their biggest gain is Tom Brady's not there anymore. I think that's been their kryptonite. That's been the whole division's kryptonite. Now I think it's that mental aspect too of knowing like, okay, we actually have a chance now. After 15 years of the same bullshit, now finally saying, okay, it's at least a little different. One of those guys, the main guy, will not be there anymore. So let's see what happens. And I think that could be a huge component of it as well. And, obviously, they made the playoffs last year too. So hopefully work up that momentum. So moving on to the Dolphins. This one, they did a lot. They did
Yeah.
a lot, a lot, a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
gaining players, they brought in Byron Jones to a huge contract. They brought in Kyle Van Noy to a relatively big deal. Eric Flowers is somehow still in the league, let alone got a 3-year, $30 million deal. Emmanuel Agba, who I don't actually really know. Jordan Howard. Okay, that's another name that I know. I mean, they spent big, and they spent big on defense. One thing we know about football is you don't win through free agency. The team that wins free agency usually doesn't pan out. The
Mhm.
Giants did that 1 year, and they were good for a year, and then they just got awful. And then their cap situation was just a mess for another 3 years. So it usually doesn't work out. Give me both sides of the argument. Do you think, well, personally, do you think it will work out with the players that they brought in and the culture that they're bringing? And, how do you feel like the players they brought in, how they'll fit into the system there and down in Miami?
It's very interesting. With Brian Flores, what they completely overhauled this team. I mean,
Mhm.
we saw them just sell away anyone who teams
They
wanted to
just
buy.
gave away Minka Fitzpatrick. He's
Um,
fantastic. They just gave him away. Whatever. Here, give us a first round pick
yep.
back. Like, okay, whatever. Who says no?
Unbelievable between him, trading away Tunsil to Houston. I mean, they just offloaded guys that were major building blocks. But it wasn't, I guess, the right fit. I mean, and I know you look at teams that constantly rebuild, and it's always never the right fit.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what? At the same time, if you have a guy that doesn't want to be there and isn't going to buy in, then that's fine. Then it's time for him to move on, get what you can for him, and just hope that you're able to take that return and turn it into something. I think Brian Flores, I like him a lot. I think that it was a big jump for him, taking over that role, leaving New England. I think with some seasoning and with some time, I think that'll help him come along as well. And I think that look at Miami and what they did in the draft. I like what they did in the draft. I like what they did in free agency, just from the sheer fact that, again, teams that win free agency don't win football games,
Mm-hmm.
but they're trying to also develop a new identity. So some of the guys you bring in, like a Grugier Hill kind of guy on a 1-year deal, played in Philly, very underrated special teams linebacker. Bringing him in, Emmanuel Agba, another guy, 2-year deal, again underrated in his abilities, with just a tremendous program, as well as Kyle Van Noy. We already talked about him.
Mm-hmm.
Byron Jones was the huge splash for
Yeah.
them in the secondary. Actually, I think they have a very strong secondary. So when you look at this team lining up defensively, they actually got a lot better. I mean, I think when you look at those two and Byron Jones, Kyle Van Noy, interesting to see. But if anyone could figure him out, I think Brian Flores will be that guy. I'd be surprised if a guy that knows him that well can't utilize him to the best of his abilities. I mean, they went very heavy on the defensive side of the football in free agency. So, when you look at them, and then they added more in the draft in the first round as well, late first round pick in the secondary. I think that this is a team that is trying to create their new identity. They see it turning of the tide in the AFC East. They tried to get younger very quickly through the draft in terms of accruing so many draft picks. And then they tried to make some impact moves in free agency. They're not all going to pay off, but Byron Jones can step in, be that guy, that number one corner, and then Kyle Van Noy can be that leader, maybe more of a silent leader on the defensive side of the ball. Then I think you have two guys there that'll be there for the next 4 to 5 years that are going to really help solidify things. So,
and it's I'm again the Dolphins are another one of those teams. So my mom actually is a big Dolphins fan, so I've always kind of had a soft spot for them. One of my good buddies, also a big Dolphins fan, so I'm always rooting for him as well. And it's just one of those things, as you said, it's always never the right time. And you know what that gets you? Just perpetual mediocrity, and making the playoffs occasionally, not doing anything with it the 1 or 2 times that you do, and then just being in this like kind of the worst place to ever be, that treadmill of mediocrity. Yep. Where you're always okay. We're 6-10 this year, so you have a top 8 pick, I guess. You're not getting a quarterback with a top 8 pick. Okay. And it's just one of those things where you're just never bad enough, and you're clearly never good enough to do anything with it. So I think the Dolphins did the right thing in actually, I guess, trying to be bad. I mean, they traded away Tunsil, and yeah, I mean, everyone was making the fact they're like, oh, now they need a left tackle. How ironic. But they got 2 firsts and 2 seconds for the guy. Even if they needed a left tackle, I'm sure they're letting him go. And then he signs this monster, like 3 years, $65 million deal. Got to give it to Bill O'Brien on that one. And so it's just, yeah, they needed a left tackle, but they didn't need a left tackle for 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks does not come easy. So in the first 70 picks, they had 6. They almost had 10% of the first 70 picks or 60 picks, whatever it is, which is ridiculous. That does not happen. I mean, 3 first-round picks, 2 seconds, and a third is just insane. As we said, who they brought in, they retained a couple guys of note, Zach Seiler, maybe you can say that, Vince Beagle, a couple guys. Everyone else is just really 1-year deals, or like even the other Isaiah Ford on a 4-year deal, I don't think is for that much money. So it's one of those like, hey, and I think during the season, they started looking around at guys that actually bought in, such as Eric Rowe, if I'm not mistaken. They gave him a couple years at a really small amount of money, so that way they can build this thing the right way, as a true Bill Belichick disciple did. And they didn't really lose anybody because they traded them all away before they could lose them, I think. So I think that's of note as well. But moving into the draft, I mean, it's just ridiculous. I mean, they were able to get potentially the best quarterback off the board at 5. At 18, they got one of the best offensive tackles. I'd say out of that second tier of offensive tackles, one of the best ones. I can't say the guy they got out of Auburn with the number 30th overall pick, but they, highly thought of him. Second round, they're going with another guard. They're getting defensive tackles. They're getting safeties. They're literally getting everything they need in those first, 6 or 7 picks. And then they just have so many more after that. So I guess we'll start at the top. I mean, Tua, he would have been the first round pick 2 years ago. He would have been the first pick overall 1 year ago. And he gets hurt and now is able to drop all the way to 5. So the Dolphins can just sit and scoop him up. They didn't have to totally tank for what they got. They had those other 2 first round picks. I mean, just the first round, how did you feel it went?
Yeah, I liked obviously what they did in the first round, right? I mean, you get 2 at 5. Good for them holding where they were too.
I really wanted somebody to trade with the Giants, man. Just give me like an extra 4th. I don't care. It would have been good, but nope, nothing.
And obviously those calls were out there, right? And we know that was being discussed constantly. Good for Miami to just hold where they were at 5. Mm-hmm. And I think they have a tremendous talent, obviously dropped to them. Biggest thing, of course, is the red flags on the injury history. I think the biggest thing he's going to have to learn is self-preservation. Mm-hmm. When to give up on a play, and not necessarily give up, but just throw the ball away. Just don't try and do too much to it. Obviously he's had his share of injuries. We know that. However, if healthy, I know that the year that Joe Burrow had, but given the career Tua had, mm-hmm. if he was healthy and didn't have the injury history, I mean, you're telling me that he wouldn't have gone 1 if he didn't have that hip injury, even the ankle injuries and everything else in there. Without the hip injury, if he finished the year out, 1, you might have seen a different result at the end of the mm-hmm. season. But if he wasn't hurt, I find it hard to believe his overall package wouldn't have trumped that. Mm-hmm. So with that said, you got a guy at 5 that could have maybe gone 1 if he was healthy. Is he healthy now? Okay, well, thanks to a lot of things that happened, he couldn't get down to Miami for that mm-hmm. visit. They tried to get him down there the night before the kind of lockdown took place. He wasn't able to get down there. So they also were doing it based off of just knowledge they had. So they took a little bit of a risk there just because they weren't 100% certain. However, the reward is extremely high for a guy mm-hmm. like him. Very unique too, with a lefty thrower in the league. It makes every other team game plan differently because mm-hmm. you just don't have that, especially his ability. I mean, he's an extremely accurate quarterback. He's someone who can, bomb the ball down the field, but I think his accuracy was the thing that really was the biggest linchpin in terms of his ability to just step into the pro level, even despite the fact he's not, extremely tall quarterback, mm-hmm, but mm-hmm. you look at what he can do accuracy wise. And I love what they did there. Austin Jackson, obviously from USC. I mean, you bring a tackle in that, it's ironic because you have a different blind side for Tua being a lefty, but I like Austin Jackson a lot. I think he was a very good pickup. I mean, you can't go wrong in this draft. That big first round group of offensive tackles, obviously they're maybe not everyone works out, but next to wide receiver, I think O tackle is probably the strongest group when mm-hmm. you look at the early round here. So, and then they have a very interesting pick very late in the first round. It's, not a tall cornerback, but extremely athletic. I'll try and pronounce his name, Noah Igbenogany. I will make sure to clip that one out so that we can use that along the internet. How's that sound? I'll try my best here. I was trying to follow pronunciation on him.
You're perfect. You're perfect.
But what's very interesting is someone who went to Auburn. He started actually on the offensive side of the ball, so he's going to have to learn the defensive side more. He transitioned over. His mom was a 2-time Olympic track athlete from Nigeria. So when you look at bloodlines, a lot of times you look at football bloodlines, mm-hmm. but let's just look at the athletic background. I mean, you're talking about someone who is a top 25 wide receiver nationally as a recruit, ends up becoming a cornerback at a power SEC program, has bloodlines that he was one of the best track runners in the country when he was in high school too. I think he actually broke the Alabama state record in one of the jumps, and was just a phenomenal athlete. So I think late in the first round, you get a high value athlete that if he can develop, and obviously you have a guy like Byron Jones now who's coming in, more your veteran guy, maybe take the kid under his wing. You think you have a very good secondary already. This kid could be someone who really develops into a top athletic talent. And, it's, you can't teach some of those things, right? And that's what a lot of teams look like, is that, when you can't teach that, you draft it and you try and teach, right? You try and just teach them how to play the game. So three first
you can't
round
teach
picks.
Speed, baby.
You can't.
Can't teach
And
speed.
I'll tell you, that's a very, very productive first round. And obviously it kept continuing right into the second and into the third.
Yeah, I mean, especially with the three most important positions: quarterback, offensive line, and defensive pass rush tackle, or defensive end edge rush would be. Most people would say probably in that order. You need a good quarterback. You need someone that can then make sure that quarterback doesn't get touched, and then you kind of want somebody that can get to the other quarterback. After that, with the ability to grab a cornerback as well in the first round. That's, in my opinion, and most people's opinion, I think I'm stealing this from a lot of people, but you need then someone to make sure that the quarterback can't throw the ball to anybody, right? Like it's all obviously based around the quarterback and what they do now. And it's just one of those things where they got three players that they believed were at the perfect spots for their board in three of the four most important positions in football. That, again, 3 first-round picks rarely ever happens. And if they can hit on 2 of these 3, one obviously needing to be Tua, this, no matter what, will be a successful draft for them. Then, as you said, you add everything in after that. In the second round, 39th overall, they got a guard out of Louisiana, not University. I think Louisiana Tech, if I'm not mistaken. And then 56 overall, they got Raekwon Davis, defensive tackle out of Alabama. Again, there's your blue blood. There's your defensive line help. How do you think these two guys, and why did they go with the guard out of Louisiana when there was some other people definitely still on the board?
I think at that point, it's just, every team has their own board and how they value players, obviously. And when you get smaller school guys, you always kind of question that when they go off the board, especially early in the second round. It's like, okay, what about him really stuck out? I think you look at what they've done. They got Power 5, USC in Austin Jackson. They go later with Solomon Kinley, guard out of Georgia, again, Power 5. Robert Hunt, one of those guys. You look at offensive linemen around the league, you always end up finding these smaller program guys that just somehow, whether they just weren't big enough coming out of high school, they just were overshadowed, didn't find a way to a big program, but found a way to be very productive. Guard early in the second round, interesting decision. But you know what? When a team is trying to rebuild and they have Tua, well, you go Jackson, Hunt, Kinley, 2 guards and a tackle. I mean, you can't fault them for trying to go heavy on the offensive line and buying in on these guys and, doing it all in the same draft. You get your quarterback that develops a bit of a bond there as well. So clearly they redid their entire line. When you look at 2 guards and a tackle all going in the first 4 rounds, I mean, that's significant. So I just like the decision making, like with Hunt, that's a pick that that's a personal choice coming from Miami that they decide that he was their guy. But if they're confident and comfortable with him, then that's all right. Then go with him and make him that guy, and build that line. Because your job right now is to protect Tua and make sure he stays healthy. If he stays healthy, this team will compete. And they obviously, were very adamant in doing so after they drafted him. So I like that. I really like the Raekwon Davis pick. I think that he's a guy that, falling to 56, defensive tackle out of Alabama, tremendous recruit going to Alabama, maybe got overshadowed from some of the other stud players in that defensive line and that front 7 and that just team in general over the last couple of years. I think he's a guy that is going to immediately step in, be an impact player. I think they got a really good one in the second round. I would be surprised, actually, if he didn't develop into a solid starter for Miami there.
Yeah, I mean, again, 2 Alabama players in their first 5 picks, but it's in the first 56 overall. It's just insane to me that they got this much of a haul. Again, they had to give up Minkah Fitzpatrick. They had to give up Laramie Tunsil to get all of this. But again, if this is not the way to rebuild on the fly, and, as you were talking about the Patriots before, it's a retool. Well, it's still a rebuild for Miami because they were coming from nothing. But I mean, I completely agree with you. really investing in the offensive line because Tua, especially with being injury prone, but just in general, I am a big believer that if you have a good offensive line, you're going to have a good team. That's just kind of how it works. Either you will be able to run the ball or the receivers will be able to get open. So we'll see what happens there. So I am really curious. Moving on, safety out of Texas, Brandon Jones. I mean, first question I have for you, Jared, is Texas back?
They looked like they were back for a time, right?
For a minute,
there was a minute when he thought, oh man, Texas is legit again. And then,
no, they
a couple
weren't.
games later and all of a sudden
They were
not
not.
so much.
What do you know about this gentleman, safety out of Texas, and how does he fit? I mean, they went cornerback. They picked up a cornerback in free agency again. Kind of now building. They built the offensive line. Now it looks like they're trying to build the back end of the defense as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we talked about their secondary, right? And they get a little deeper here picking him. This was, let's remember, Texas had tried to kind of put the mantra out that they were DBU, right?
Yeah.
And you get Earl Thomas and you get guys out there with some swagger, and all of a sudden a DB coming out of Texas is highly regarded. I think Brandon Jones is a guy that flew underneath the radar a bit in terms of, kind of big program safeties entering this draft. Obviously, you have some of the bigger names that, deservedly so went ahead of him. But, getting a pick 70, I think you're getting a guy that, is nonetheless, I mean, Texas, even though they're not back, they're still a program that still develops guys that can become productive pros. I don't know what's going on, like why their program can't find a way to get back on track at a college level, but they still recruit very well and they still have very good players come through their program. So I think Brandon Jones will be an interesting pick for Miami in terms of where he fits into the picture. He's obviously not an immediate plug and play, and you wouldn't expect that at pick 70 anyway, but a guy that provides some depth to what's already a good secondary. And I think that at that point in the draft and what the needs they've already addressed, you give up a Minkah Fitzpatrick and it's like, what, let's get two guys to try and replace what he could do for the team. And, you already kind of take a shot here with, with a cornerback in the first round. They come back around in the third with Jones. So interesting pick. Again, you look at what that college has produced in the defensive back, and it's hard to ignore what they've done. So just, not a big name guy coming out of the program, but nonetheless, I think someone that could provide some depth to that team in third round. Why not?
Exactly. I mean, I don't know. I'll be very honest. I don't know too much about the depth of safety there at in Miami, but I think again, it's a position that is coveted. It's a position that is useful. Now, considering him coming out of Texas, was he one of the safeties that also lined up in the corner? Lined up in slot, and he would line up in all these other places. Maybe Rod Armstead. Do you know anything about him, or is he more of just like a more prototypical free or strong safety in that regard?
I think that you're seeing more versatility just across the board in the game with how safety. I mean, even like just as an example, even at the pro level, you have a guy may not work out, but a guy like Jalen Mills, who was a cornerback LSU guy, kind of that corner safety tweener. He never played safety, but was able to exude enough to actually, now he's going to line up at safety for the Eagles this year. So I think you see that across the level now where cornerbacks are getting bigger. Safeties are, they're not the type of safety maybe you would think about, from kind of the Ed Reed type of days. I think Jamal Adams is kind of a rare breed now, and we'll touch on him in a little bit. But we want to look at a Brandon Jones guy. I mean, I think that, in order to make it in the league, if you're not highly touted coming out in the secondary, you have to be flexible to move around. And, you see safety linebacker hybrids. I don't think he's big enough to fill into that role. So it's, are you athletic enough and fast enough to step into a corner position, play a hybrid safety position? I don't know. I mean, I think, jury will be out in terms of that pick. But at the end of the day, I mean, when you look at, Power 5 safety from a program that's churned out some very good defensive backs, and you have as many picks as Miami has. So maybe you can, take a little bit of a risk reward there, then you take your shots when you feel like you can.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's it's one of those you figure it out. Obviously, he was worth the pick. I think he wasn't too much of a reach in any regards. It sounded like that was around the time he should have went, maybe a little earlier, maybe a little later. But if they thought, as
Mhm.
you said, their big board displayed it, that's what they went with. And really, it's just best player available for Miami, and it just turns out the best players are all at uh, the biggest positions of need. As you said, we already talked about Solomon Kinney out of Georgia, guard with their fourth round pick, 111 overall. Number 154 overall, Jason Strobridge, defensive end out of North Carolina. Number 164 overall, so still in the fifth round, Curtis Weaver, outside linebacker out of Boise State. So it seems like, again, now they're going more pass rush again. How do you think these two guys will end up fitting in that Brian Flores kind of the Bill Belichick mold of what do you do well and how can I make you do it?
Yeah, I like I mean I like what Miami did overall, and I really like what they did here late. I think Jason Strobridge is a guy that you might hear more of as a fifth round pick. I think he's someone actually that can develop into a productive pro,
Mm-hmm.
especially the Bill Belichick School of Defense. Brian Flores earned a master's, if not a PhD, while he was there, and now
Mm-hmm.
he's moving on to a place in which he can actually take his own New England type players
Mm-hmm.
and mold them into that defense. You get two of those, Strobridge and Weaver. I think Weaver could have gone even a little sooner than when he went. You look at DN outside linebacker, kind of in both types of roles, can maybe play a little bit on both sides of that. When you look at what the game is kind of showing you from a D end and
Mm-hmm.
outside linebacker, depending on how you line these guys up. But
Mm-hmm.
I like both of those picks. I really think that Strobridge is someone that, as well as Weaver, was kind of underrated. Maybe just because North Carolina wasn't a very prolific
Mm-hmm.
program. Curtis Weaver, Boise State seems to send guys to the pros, and people just continue to ignore the fact that they actually develop good talent.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you look at the track record from that team, and you still undervalue players that come out of there, but somehow these guys stick, and
Mm-hmm.
they're not big names by any means, but they're productive players. And I think
Exactly.
in the fifth round, you have two guys that could make an impact for your team. I mean, in the fifth round, when you're finding that, I think that you have a very methodical approach to your draft. I like what they did there. I don't know about taking a long snapper in the sixth round. I don't
That
understand that as much, but other than
no.
that, I think they had a good draft.
Yeah, and I really love Malcolm Perry. I mean, I watch
Yeah.
the Army Navy game every single year. He's just he's a small dude, so I don't know if he'll actually pan out. Maybe this was, again, they had so many picks at this point. This especially at 246. So I mean, we're 9 away from the end, right? 255 overall. Frigate. This guy deserves to be drafted for just what he's done. Do I think he does anything? No. I mean, we saw Keenan Reynolds, if I'm not mistaken, a few years ago. Same guy out of Navy, just a little bit bigger. He hasn't really done anything. I think he was drafted by Baltimore. Same thing, seventh round. We'll see. I think it's cool. It's a nice story. I don't think anything's going to come of it. But as you already said, Miami is really on this rebuild. I think with what they've done in signings, they should be, if it was a normal year, I think they'd be a year away. We'll see what happens, especially with Tua and some of these offensive linemen, who pans out, who doesn't. Again, most of their team they're bringing in is very young, and this is the worst time to do that, considering, as we spoke about before, there's really no offseason for young guys, or really potentially could be an offseason in general. So we'll see what happens, but I like you think Miami did a pretty damn good job.
I think so. And just one final note with them, because it wasn't on the players acquired because it was during the draft. Picking up Matt Breida, who's going
Oh,
to
yeah.
step in
Mm-hmm.
on the running back side. I know they picked up Jordan Howard, but I think Breida is going to make an impact at running back for them. And the question will be, will Devontae Parker be able to repeat his success this past year with Ryan Fitzpatrick this year, whether it's with Fitzpatrick to start or
Mm-hmm.
Tua? I think if Parker has a big year, and I think if Breida can really take over as more of the lead back rather than kind of the three-headed monster he was
Mm-hmm.
a part of in San Fran, I think you might see that offense also be more productive this year too.
Yeah, that's a good point. I forgot about that one. That was like one of those weird late, like third day. It's like, oh, what, Matt Breida? Wasn't he like the starting running back in San Francisco? Then you remember it doesn't matter. They could put you or I back there and we could still probably run for 250 yards on the Packers. So it is what it is. But yeah, overall, I think they did great. And, I'm rooting for them. I think it's awesome. If they'll get their one win against New England, however it comes, it's an inevitability, especially these last few years. And it's going to be real weird. Real weird. So I'm excited to see how it happens this year. So onto the last team, the AFC East, we have the New York Jets. They brought in some players. They let go of some other players. I don't know. The Jets suck, man. They're just like always constantly in a bad position. Last year, they let their GM make all the signings, draft all the draft picks, and immediately fired him, which makes zero sense. That's just something a team that's consistently dysfunctional would do. They bring in George Fant, who, okay, whatever. They bring in Patrick Onwuara, so well, okay, also good. Brashad Perriman, I think it was more the offense than he was. I mean, I think he's good, not great. He pretty much just replaces Robbie Anderson anyway. I mean, of the players they brought in, of the players they retained, was there anything of note for you personally?
I mean, nothing significant. I think you look at the fact their biggest thing is trying to protect Sam Darnold.
Mm-hmm.
The only way this team gets any better is if he truly is the guy and you protect him. We'll talk about the draft picks. They went that way early, of course. George Fant coming in. Actually, kind of an underrated signing I like was Connor McGovern, 3-year deal, guard. I think he's a steady guard, and for a team that's been atrocious in so many ways. Actually, I like that pickup. I think that he's someone that probably could have gone to a more competitive team and made an impact also. So for a team that is just really trying to find identity and protect Sam Darnold, actually a good pickup there. George Fant, we'll see. And then, but I think that's kind of the theme. You look at a lot of 1-year deals. I don't expect a lot of these to pan out, quite frankly. I think Perriman's just a shot in the dark, like just hoping you catch lightning in a bottle. You lose Robbie Anderson, your most productive receiver. Not that he was a star by any means, but
exactly.
He was also big part of your offense, and I think in an offense it's rather inept to say the least. So the question is, you go all in on Sam Darnold, right? He's your guy. You build an offensive line around him. You made a significant move to try and get him a star running back. Jury's out if that's going to truly pan out at the end of the day. I think a lot of people are starting to get on the other side of that, where it's maybe not so sunny.
Don't pay running backs. Don't pay running backs. That's what it comes down to.
So I think that's what they're trying to do here. What they're trying to accomplish is a line for Bell to run behind to protect Sam Darnold, and then they build out from there. I think that was their approach. We'll see how it pans out. They retained a lot of guys as well on short-term deals. So they're trying to go with the group they have. Adam Gase as head coach, didn't really work in Miami. I don't know why they would think it would work so much in New York, but they always do odd front office related and coaching related decisions in New York. And I always kind of scratch my head at those. So
Always. It makes no sense. The Jets are terrible. They're always going to be terrible if they keep doing stupid things. And it is what it is, man. I don't really get it. I mean, they have no wide receivers, so they bring in Perriman on a 1-year deal. So I understand the need there. Offensive line is obviously necessary, as we've been talking about this whole time, what the Bills do in their front seven, what the Patriots do, and just being smarter than everyone. With Brian Flores looking like he's building this monster of a defense now, you have to bring an offensive lineman and they go get George Fant, right? Like it's just one of those things. Like, of course, this is what the Jets are going to do. Obviously, they did start to look at some of these things within the draft. So first round, 11 overall, Mekhi Becton. He could have went as high as 4 to the Giants. He could have went as low as, mid to late first round. It made sense that he went to the Jets at 11. I was, of all that top tier of linemen, the one I want the Giants to pick the least was Mekhi Becton. After doing some reading on him and just kind of seeing that he doesn't, I mean, I think he had 70 true pass blocking plays last year total in like almost 800 snaps or 700 something snaps. So like, I don't know, like it's obviously a product of the offense. His intangibles, or I'm sorry, his attributes are insane. Obviously a dude that's 365 that runs like a 5'1" is terrifying. But I mean, how do you feel about him? And I mean, is he going to be just another Eric Flowers, just a big dude that turns out he's not very good?
I believe that he was the highest drafted offensive lineman by the Jets since Brickshaw Ferguson.
Yep.
And you think back and, Mekhi Becton has all of the attributes in the world. He's a mountain of a man. He is terrifyingly fast for someone who's that big. So, think about him like pulling outside to help out on a stretch running play, and like you're a defensive back and you see that guy coming after you, you just don't want to be anywhere near
just fall down. Yeah.
Now, with that said, as you said, when it comes to to the pass protection, that's the question. They need to protect Sam Darnold. If Sam Darnold can't get off the ground here in New York, then they're just back to ground zero one more time, and it's just continuously just a disaster. I personally, in my opinion, think that the more steady pick. I mean, Becton has tremendous potential, but it's also, boomer bust. And I say that at 11 when you're talking about a draft that had so many good offensive tackles. Because if you're the team that drafts the guy that doesn't work out or doesn't work out with you, then it looks very bad when you look back at the draft. Yeah. That's why I mean that. He's obviously a tremendous prospect, and I think he obviously could have gone even higher. Personally, they passed on a guy like Wirfs, again, another Iowa guy. I know I was on Epineza earlier, but Big Ten linemen on both sides of the ball. A lot of them have productive careers in the pros. I'm not saying that that's the only reason why. I just look at Wirfs. You look at a guy that has put together a full package in college of his abilities. I think Becton, you look more at the potential, whereas Wirfs may not be as sexy when you look at it, if you're going to compare the two. But I also think that he's going to be a more steady pro, or at least coming in from day one, will be a guy that is going to be able to plug in, is going to understand and be able just to step right in a little more than Becton, who maybe is a little more on the project side, if you just were to look at the two of them.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why, again, you want to protect your quarterback. You probably want to go with the more sure thing. Now, maybe they thought Becton was the more sure thing. I don't know, but it's crazy to me that they're, poor Sam Darnold, man. He was, after that Penn State game, I mean, I watched that entire game. That thing was nuts. The Rose Bowl from a few years back, his true sophomore year, if I'm not mistaken. That game was insane. He was a monster in that game, doing everything he could. Then he kind of sucked the next year. He didn't suck. He just wasn't great. And he's kind of, every year, just it seems like, okay, well, maybe next year. So I'm kind of curious to see what happens with him. Obviously, not a Jets fan, but it's nice to see competent play in any capacity. I mean, the two New York teams have pretty much been out of it from week 4 in the last 3 seasons. It's been pretty boring here in New York, considering football is so big and we have multiple teams, and they're both just consistently terrible, at least the last few years. So they did try and help him again. 2nd round, 59 overall, Denzel Mims, wide receiver out of Baylor. A lot of people thought he might go a little bit higher. I know Justin hates him. I don't know how you feel about him. Justin, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure Justin was not a huge fan of him. He's a big guy. He catches the ball, but what else? I mean, I don't know. How do you feel about him, and how do you think he fits into the offense?
I mean, I think he's a good pick at 59. When you're looking at the draft, he's a guy that was in that second tier mix. When you were hearing a lot of, between him, you got the kid at Arizona State, Rieger, who went a little higher than maybe people initially thought when you're looking at things from from TCU, and you just kind of look at that second tier outside of that top early first round group. Denzel Mims was a guy that a lot of people had also been talking about to Philadelphia, even at where they were picking in the first round. So I think that when you have an opportunity to get a guy at 59 that, again, and I know I mentioned this earlier, but in a different draft year, he would have been thought of higher. You can pick apart his game. I think he's a guy that at that point in the draft, for a team that has truly no wide receiver weapons, lost Robbie Anderson, why not, right? Because who knows, this guy, he may go in, may develop a great rapport with Sam Darnold, and at that point in the 2nd round, then take a look, because that guy might have gone earlier in a different draft, whether right or wrong, whether he worked out or not. But I think at that point, I think for the Jets, who have no weapons and lost the only one they had at receiver, why not, take the pick?
Yeah, it makes sense. Again, they needed a wide receiver. If he was the best one on their board, again, they, do what they have to do. So 3rd round, their first 3rd round pick, this one's from the Giants for Leonard Williams. For whatever reason, they pick Ashton Davis, safety out of California. I'm pretty sure you were pretty high on this guy. I know Justin was, at least. I remember we watched this day together. How do you feel about this guy, and how do you think he fits into that Jets defense?
Yeah, I'd like this pick a lot. I think he was someone that a lot of people actually talked to about if you were to look like one of the top 10 underrated guys entering the draft. There were a few names out there. Ironically, Arnett, the defensive back from Ohio State, people thought was underrated and ended up going earlier than anyone even thought to Oakland, but, or to Las Vegas now, the Raiders. Anyway, still always call him Oakland. Anyway, point is that Ashton Davis falls into that group as well. I think in the third round, I like this draft pick. I think he's a guy that, for at this point in the draft, is a guy that can develop into a very productive safety. I think is very underrated in his abilities in that position. The question is what that team's going to end up doing with Jamal Adams. Clearly, he's not happy there. There's been a lot of talk about that, of the virtual, team meetings and whatnot that he's choosing not to participate in and all of that. So, I think good pick at that point too. If you're not sure what's going to happen with Jamal Adams and if you're going to have to move on from him, at least you have a guy in Ashton Davis that I think actually could step in and is someone in the third round, really good value at safety.
Yeah, I think it's a good place. As you said, I mean, they got this extra third round pick, so they might as well do something with it. And their third round pick, they picked Jabari Zaninga, defensive end out of Florida. Very productive when he's on the field, but I don't think he's been on the field too much the last couple of years, if I'm not mistaken. If he's good, they picked Josiah Pillay out of Florida a couple of years in the third round. A couple of years ago in the third round, they cut him, I think, before preseason even ended. He was just a piece of junk, though. I'm not comparing Zaninga to him, but just in terms of just, full circle, how do you think he's going to end up fitting into this defensive line?
He was the first of 3 picks out of the state of Florida, back-to-back Gators getting taken by them. An interesting player, because I think where they drafted him is probably about where people saw him going in the third round. Trying to put together what they think he'll be as a pro compared to what he did in college, production, lack thereof, lack of games played. I think there's just a lot of question marks in his game. When he puts it all together, could be a productive player off the end. I think that there's no doubting his ability, his size, and how he can play off that rush. I just don't know if he'll be able to put it together. And I don't know if a team like the Jets, in where they're at right now, is the best team to help this guy put it all together. I think that if he went to a team that maybe had better structure and he was able to learn from a team that had just a better setup from a defensive line and defensive end perspective, maybe then, you look at his ability to produce a couple years down the road. I think that with this team, I don't know if he'll be a productive player with the Jets. He might be a guy that you look a couple years down the road that ends up signing with a team, as we started off talking about, like a Danny Shelton going to New England because it's terrible in Cleveland. This could be a guy that ends up maybe getting a second shot somewhere with a team that is able to utilize him if he can stay healthy, put it together. I just don't see it up front right now.
Yeah, I think, again, got to stay healthy, but I think that's for everybody in general. I mean, Sam Darnold has to stay healthy or the Jets can't win any games anyway. So we'll see what happens there. They had a few fourth round picks, and you alluded to a couple guys out of Florida in a row. Fourth round pick for 120, they picked LaMichael P. Ryan, running back out of Florida. 125, they actually picked James Morgan, quarterback out of Florida International, in 129. So 3 picks relatively close to each other. Cameron Clark, offensive tackle out of Charlotte. Of these fourth round picks, outside of the quarterback, because that one's I want to talk a little bit about, how do you feel about LaMichael P. Ryan and Cameron Clark, offensive tackle out of Charlotte?
I think that P. Ryan can carve out a role on this offense and in this type of NFL. I think that by looking at his ability, his speed is unquestioned. I mean, he's someone that you get the ball in his hands and he can make things happen. This is a team that is very empty when it comes to the cupboard of athletes and people who can make a difference when the ball is in their hands. So why not? Good situation for him, especially with what's going on at running back too. You have no idea what's going on with Bell. Just a lot of question marks there. This guy can provide you a little bit of juice out of the backfield. I think good pick in the fourth round, a guy that maybe gives Darnold just a little bit of a different option. I don't know if he, maybe be like a, Tariq Cohen kind of guy in terms of his role and how he can help the team, but no questioning his athletic ability and how explosive he can be with the ball.
And then, so what about we saw with the Jets, they lose Sam Darnold to mono. He's kissing too many cute girls in Hoboken. I mean, honestly, kudos to him for that. But they lose him. They have their backup, Trevor Siemian, then immediately gets his ankle snapped in half, which was pretty sad and kind of gross too. So that was unfortunate. Now you're working with a an undrafted or like a 6th-round pick in Luke Falk, some nobody that wasn't even supposed to be on the team. He was their practice squad through and through. And now he's starting 3 games for you, 4 games for you. That's not supposed to happen. You're not going to win, as we said before. If you're not winning with your backup quarterback in the NFL 9 times out of 10, you're definitely not winning with your third string running quarterback. So I understand them picking a quarterback. I honestly have no idea who this guy is or what he's done. So I don't know what kind of insight you have on him. But I mean, if you can tell me anything about James Morgan, I'd love to hear it now.
I mean, I think that you kind of hit the nail on the head. It's not really, what James Morgan can do for this team now. It's just like having an insurance policy, someone who you can. They obviously, of all the quarterbacks around this time, when you think about the Easons, the Froms, Morgan, you had a couple other guys that came off the board later. They obviously liked him enough from a package perspective to take him at that point in the 4th round, saying, you know what, if things don't work out with Darnold, then Morgan could develop and be a guy that we're more confident in than the guys that we had, as you aforementioned, those names of guys that probably will never start again in the league.
Nope.
So I think that's just, really kind of the beginning and the end right now for James Morgan is, will he see the field? Depends if Sam Darnold gets hurt. If he sees the field,
it's a problem.
That's a problem for the Jets. Nothing against this guy. I think he's an insurance policy, and I think if things go south there with Darnold, then this team's going to have to blow it up anyway. And quite frankly, then they just start looking at quarterback early in the draft in the next coming years. So backup potential, and a guy that I think is obviously proved enough to the team to at least have him take a shot at him at 4th round.
And you make a good point. Eason's still on the board. Jake Fromm's still on the board. There's some dudes that came off in the 2nd or 7th round that were, obviously still on the board as well. The one thing I would say about those other 2 guys is they have starter potential, I think. I know Jake Fromm, no one thinks he has starter potential. Jacob Eason definitely, in my opinion, has some sort of starter potential. And thankfully he landed in the place with the Colts where they can at least look at him for a year. And if he's good, roll with it. If Phillip Rivers sucks and they're bad, okay, and you can see what he looks like this year or maybe next year and see what happens. But do you think that went into it as well, just to make sure that everyone knew, like, hey, we're taking a guy out of Florida International. Don't worry, Sam Darnold is 1,000% going to be our quarterback no matter what.
It's ironic because that might have been an underlying thought that no one wants to say. It's also ironic that it comes from the Bears through the Patriots, this pick. Yeah. And yet, when we talk about quarterbacks and the Patriots, it's like, of all the teams, this pick somehow ends up in the Jets, and they somehow take this guy that, quite frankly, when you're talking about the best quarterbacks available, you were talking about those other bigger names and guys that came out of bigger programs, had more success on the college level, and yet you're taking a guy in James Morgan that, to your point, is no threat.
Weird they still took him in the 4th round, but no, it's just kind of a thought that, like, again, Jacob Eason at least comes with some name. You knew him in college. He played at Georgia, then he played at Washington for a little while on some good teams. Jacob Eason, obviously, the last 3 years, they're always in that national conversation as one of the best 4, 5, 6 teams in the nation. I don't know. I didn't really realize Florida International was a school. I mean, like, I know it is because I watch too much college football, but let's be honest. Did you think a Florida International quarterback's coming off the board before Georgia, before Washington, again with some of these names? I don't know. It's weird that, if he was there, they thought he was going to go that high. I don't know. It makes sense. They need the insurance, but it's just a very weird pick in my opinion.
I agree. I think sometimes teams get a little too cute within themselves as well, and they try and almost fool other people in the draft by saying, hey, we're going to take this guy because, he might be something and you didn't think he'd be anything. But sometimes it's just safer to go with the sure bet. This is just one of those moves by the Jets that is a classic Jets move.
Jets, man. And then so these last 3 picks, as I already said, Cameron Clark, offensive tackle out of Charlotte, Bryce Hall, cornerback out of Virginia, and then they took a punter in the 6th round. So I guess that's kind of cool. Of those 2 positional players, outside of the punter, of course, I mean, offensive tackle, as we said, they need to protect him. At least they went 1 offensive tackle early. Then they grab a guy in the 4th round. I mean, we'll see what happens again from the Patriots through the Ravens and the Patriots, which is kind of funny how that happens. And then Bryce Hall is just straight up their 5th round pick. Do you think either of these guys makes some sort of contribution, specifically talking about the offensive tackle? Because I think that was the biggest position in need.
Yeah, I think Cameron Clark is it's an interesting player out of Charlotte. Obviously, not a by any means a powerhouse program, right? But a guy that people do look as kind of a project as well. So
Hmm.
someone that why not at that point, especially in the fourth round? You already have two picks before that. They're all clustered together.
Hmm.
So he's a guy they could have easily taken at 120 if it was the only fourth round pick they had, and they thought he's the guy, we like him. It doesn't hurt again when you're talking about linemen in this league. They loaded up in terms of what they did with obviously the second tackle that they took plus what they did in free agency.
Hmm.
So why not in terms of that? Bryce Hall is an interesting player coming out of Virginia. Virginia was starting to really come on. Again
Hmm.
another just like what we were talking about earlier with the Dolphins first round pick out of Auburn. Hall was again a receiver. He was actually from not too far away, Bishop McDevitt, very good high school program in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Ended up going to Virginia, was someone that had a lot of success in terms of his high school career as a recruit, going to a school like Virginia. He was someone that really stepped right in as a true freshman too. He was someone that Virginia thought of highly as a recruit. I
Hmm.
think had some offers to go elsewhere, maybe didn't have the opportunity to play right away. So you're talking about someone also that played every year that he was in college. I know that he did have some injuries his senior year, especially tough for a kid that where he fell at that point in the fifth round. Maybe if he didn't have that ankle injury, he might have been someone who
Hmm.
went a little bit higher. So not a bad pick there, especially when you're talking about adding to your secondary between him, Ashton Davis. I thought two good picks in the secondary. Why not take a pick there with Hall and see what you got there? I mean, fifth round for a guy that was in essence a 4-year starter at Virginia in the ACC. I mean, not a bad pick. I don't really have a whole lot there on Man the Punter out of Texas A&M. I mean, hey, you know,
Kicks the ball. There, done. That's good. But no, I think again, as we spoke about before, having a really good secondary is very important now with as much as they throw the ball. I mean, in that division specifically, I mean, I'm not going to say too much. No one really knows what Jerry Stidham is. We'll see what happens with Tua. We know he can throw the ball in college, but we don't know what he's going to do at the pro level. Josh Allen, again, has a rocket arm, but they're going to run the ball more than anything. So, I mean, maybe not as super, super necessary in that division, but you're still going to run into all these other teams that throw the ball a just ton. And, we'll see what happens. So overall, how did you think the Jets did with their draft, considering all the needs that they did have?
I think they had a decent draft, not great. It's somewhere between decent and good, just
Hmm.
because you addressed what you had to address. You helped out on the line. You got a wide receiver because Sam Darnold's going to need weapons.
Hmm.
He's going to need someone. So Mims, you take him. You got P. Ryan, who goes in the fourth. I like that pick there. Question mark with Zuniga before him, but then Ashton Davis, and then if Bryce Hall can prove as a fifth rounder to provide some value, that'll also upgrade their draft. But
Hmm.
best pick of their draft, I'd say Ashton Davis in the third round.
I love it. Good stuff, man. And then so we've gone through all three of these teams, or all four of the teams. I forget that the Jets are a team, so I apologize. How do you think this division shakes out next year? I mean, it's going to be very weird. The Patriots aren't quite the Patriots anymore. They are, but they're not. I mean, Tom Brady's not there. He's half of that mothership, that Death Star. The Bills probably feeling themselves, especially after last year. The Dolphins loading up on defense and now hoping that either Ryan Fitzpatrick can be capable next year or Tua can step in and actually be really good. And I think the Jets are still going to suck, so I'm not too worried about them. Of those other three teams, how do you think they shake out in terms of who comes out as the division winner?
Yeah, I think it comes down to New England and Buffalo. New England, because it's still Bill Belichick and it's still the Patriots. And until someone knocks them off the mountain, they're still the Kings. And they've been the Kings literally since we were in the first decade of the 2000s.
Yep.
So when you look at that, you're talking about a team that you can't say that they're going to be usurped until they are. And that's just the reality. Do I think that Buffalo has a very good chance this year of doing so? I do. I think what they did last year, I think if they build upon it, I can see them taking that next step. I see New England in a transitional period. Obviously, we talked about what their losses were. The question is just going to be, because this is such a quarterback league, what they did. I mean, this is the first time in 20 years we're talking about this question. But quite frankly, you don't have a bell cow running back. Sony Michel is your guy, but he's not going to be a guy that you can all of a sudden turn this into a running team. So whoever is your quarterback, whether it's Jarrett Stidham, whether it's Hoyer, whether you go a different option, that person is going to have to lead your team to victory. And you also lost some pieces in the secondary, 3 particular pieces I look at in the two linebackers and Harmon in the back end that are going to make a difference as well. So this is a team that I think is right now transitioning, and their arrow is pointing down right now where the Bills is pointing up. Miami, I'll be interested to see what they do this year, because if they buy in, they're a team that, can second half of the season start to creep up on some teams and maybe win some games where teams thought they can kind of, oh, this is an easy win for us when it comes to playoff positioning. They can definitely spoil the party. I can see them being that. I see the Jets struggling again this year, of course, but I think it comes down to New England and Buffalo. And right now, I think it's a toss-up. I think it's very close in terms of what other people are saying out there in terms of odds and kind of what that is. But if I were to just take kind of a guess in terms of my opinion of what team comes out of this, I would say that I think Buffalo is going to find a way to finally break that streak of New England and win the division. I just think that New England's quarterback play, I saw Stidham very briefly when he came in. He came in, threw a pick six, and put Brady right back in the game. That's not giving me a lot of confidence in him to win a division. He may be able to take over the offense, and they might be functional. But what I saw from Buffalo compared to what I saw briefly from Stidham, I'm going to give it to Buffalo. I also think that what they did in the draft in their offseason, I think they only strengthened their team. So I think they're going to get better.
I want to agree with you, man. I want to agree so bad. As you said before, we can't write off the Patriots until they're gone. I do think both teams do make the playoffs, though, now that we have that extra spot, that seventh spot. And doing all of these, I think I've given that seventh spot to about 8 or 9 teams at this point. So might have to figure all that out when all things are said and done. But I do think it's very hard to see the Patriots not in the playoffs, especially as we said over the last 15 years or whatever it's been, 16, 17 years. They've missed it once, and they were still 10-6 that year. And they're obviously not going to miss a seventh spot at 10-6. So we'll see what happens. I do think Buffalo pulls it out. I do think Buffalo's a little bit as well. And I wouldn't be surprised if they lose a couple dumb games. But, again, I think the momentum that they're carrying, the opportunity that they can see in front of them, and not the opportunity to not have Tom Brady there, I think is the biggest addition for all three teams just by having him leave. So we'll see what happens. But Jared, this was awesome. I really appreciate the extensive nature of your information and the opportunity that you took. And you really, again, sincerely appreciate your time. And I didn't realize this would go 2 hours, but it didn't feel like 2 hours. I hope you had some fun. We got to talk some football. And yes, Jerry, Fitzmagic, I apologize. But I really, sincerely do appreciate your time, all the energy, the effort, the information that you